In the grim darkness of the far future, the Legiones Astartes, the Space Marine Legions, are the most terrifying cohorts of killers ever crafted by the master of mankind. They are, with agonizing paradox, both humanity's greatest protectors and its mightiest foes in a savage and unyielding galaxy. The genetic structure and transcendent power of the Space Marines of the Imperium bear the colossal burden of the survival of all humankind, a responsibility heavier than any mountain, any stellar body. They were not born from mothers, but from the laboratories of the gene rites, from the implanting chambers where the flesh of mortals was transformed, upgraded, and reborn into something that was both more and, in a profound sense, less than human. They are living instruments of war, forged in agony and fire, tempered by the most ferocious nightmares the human mind can conjure. Yet, amongst all the founding legions, amongst the 20 Space Marine legions created from the gene seed of the 20 Primarchs, there was one core that carved out a legacy surpassing all others, a renown inscribed in blood and steel, in sacrifice and unwavering duty. A legion whose very name became synonymous with resilience, with holding the rampart when all else fell. The unwavering fortress of the Imperium, the unbreachable wall of humankind. They who never retreat, never surrender, never permit the foe to pass. The Imperial Fists. Before the glorious golden walls that protect Terra were in place, before the Phalanx drifted amidst the myriad stars like a mobile bastion, there was a world sequestered deep in the gloom of the galaxy. A world where light was but a faded memory, where ice sheathed every cranny, and where life had to cling to every frozen inch of ground for survival. There, the wind did not blow. It shrieked like the cry of a forlorn spirit. The temperature plummeted to a degree that breath froze in mid-air, crystallizing into tiny formations that fell as a second snow. Inwit, the name of that star system, was dry and cold like the world it represented. This was not a place for the weak. This was where only the strongest, the most hardened, and the most constant could endure through each seemingly endless night. The sun here was distant and icy, suspended upon the horizon like a tarnished silver coin. Its light was just enough to recall that there had once been a warmer epoch, a time now relegated to the sagas recounted beside dwindling fires. On these glacial worlds, humans did not reside in fragile dwellings made of wood or canvas. They lived in fortresses, thickly constructed stone citadels with walls layered upon one another like the hide of a colossal creature. Every entrance was reinforced with metal as thick as a man's forearm. Every window a slit just wide enough for an arrow to pass, and every passage designed to be a fatal trap should an enemy penetrate. For on Inwit, architecture was not an art for aesthetic contemplation. It was the science of survival. Each stone placed correctly meant a family lived through the winter. Each wall built thick enough meant a next generation could be born. And each fortress sufficiently robust meant that civilization was not consumed by the endless cold. In such a world, a child was discovered. No one knew the child's origin. The hunters who found him, a group from a noble line of Inwit, recounted seeing a strange light tear the night sky like a gash in black cloth. Then an explosion thundered, shaking the ice mountains, a sound not of nature, but of something falling from the farthest conceivable heavens. When they arrived, their feet sinking deep into the slushy snow, they found a deep, smoking crater, heated by a terrible warmth. The meters-thick surrounding ice had melted into pools of evaporating water, forming a white mist that veiled the scene like a curtain hiding a sacred secret. And in the center of that pit, amidst the vapor and the glistening light of the thawing ice, a babe lay silently. He did not shiver, though the temperature, once the strange heat had cooled, had reverted to a level capable of killing an adult within minutes. His skin was rosy, without blemish, as though the journey from the distant stars to this frigid world had left no mark. The hunters stood at the crater's edge, their hands trembling not from the cold, but from the sheer astonishment at the inexplicable sight. The child did not weep. This puzzled them more than anything else, for on Inwit every child cried upon birth. The wail was the first signal of life in the harsh world. But this babe was silent as a stone. His eyes, a deep amber like the last light of sunset reflected on ancient ice, regarded his discoverers with a composure baffling in an infant. There was no innocence in that gaze, no confusion or fear, only a cold awareness, a considered observation, as though he were assessing them, one by one, weighing their value and intent. As though he were calculating the possibilities, the courses, the potential outcomes of this meeting. And perhaps, in a sense that only gods and beings far beyond the mortal can comprehend, he truly was. House Dorn, the family that ruled a substantial portion of the Inwit system, adopted the child. This was not a simple decision, not a natural act in a society where bloodline was sacred law. In severe worlds like Inwit, ancestry and pedigree were everything. The boundary between the trusted and the suspected, the protected and the abandoned. Every noble house chronicled its forebears for thousands of years. Every marriage was arranged like a strategic chess move. Every child born bore the heavy responsibility of its legacy. But there was something in this child, something that surpassed all rules and tradition, which compelled even the ancient lords of House Dorn to pause and contemplate. Perhaps it was the too-knowing gaze, the amber eyes that looked directly at them unblinking, as if reading every thought. Perhaps it was the transcendent presence, an indefinable sense that this babe did not belong to the mortal realm. Perhaps it was simply deep instinct, the call of the blood declaring that this was someone of great import, someone destined. They named him Rogal, an ancient Inwit name signifying the wall builder, the keeper of the fortress. And they bestowed upon him the surname Dorn, not as a gift, but as a proclamation, as though he had been born into the house from the very beginning, as though his blood had coursed with theirs through generations. This was a rare honor, an acknowledgement that even distinguished warriors had to strive a lifetime to achieve. But for Rogal, it occurred naturally, like an undeniable truth, like the fall of snow in winter. And from those first days, from the initial months he spent in the stone citadel of House Dorn, it was evident that this was no ordinary child. He grew with extraordinary swiftness, not along the slow curve of children, but upon his own unique trajectory, as though time flowed differently for him. While children of his age were still learning to crawl upon the cold stone floor, still struggling to maintain balance on soft legs, Rogal was walking. His steps were as sure as an adult's. Without hesitation, without staggering, he walked as if he had known how before, as though his body were merely catching up with a pre-existing intellect. While other children learned to speak with murmuring sounds, babbling unformed words, Rogal spoke in complete sentences. His voice, even at the age of 3, was clear as a bronze bell, with every syllable precisely pronounced, with every sentence possessing unassailable logic. He did not speak as children speak. There were no innocent grammatical errors, no charming confusions. He spoke like a scholar, like a strategist, with phrases carefully arranged to convey exact meaning. When asked a question, he replied immediately, without need for consideration, as though the answer was already present in his mind, merely awaiting utterance. His foster family observed with mounting astonishment and apprehension. They had heard of the prodigy children in the ancient legends, beings blessed by the gods of Inwit. But Rogal was unlike any tale they knew. He possessed no air of the mystical, no surrounding magical aura. There was only a terrifying ordinariness in the way he surpassed every limit of childhood, as though childhood were only a temporary phase he had to endure before becoming something greater, something for which language had no descriptive word. But it was not the physical growth, not the surpassing height or the strength enough to lift stones that adults struggled with, which astonished those around Rogal the most. It was his mind, a mind that functioned like a perfect computing engine, cold and precise, as the mechanism of an ancient clockwork preserved by House Dorn from a lost golden age. A mind that never erred in assessing distance, angle, weight, or pressure. A mind that never wasted time on the futile, on the random thoughts children often indulge in, on meaningless daydreams. Every question he posed had a clear purpose. Every observation he offered led to a logical conclusion, building a complete picture of the surrounding world. When the house's masons designed a new wall to resist a blizzard from the north, they gathered around the blueprints spread on the stone table in the meeting room. These were men who had built fortresses their whole lives, men who knew every secret of stone and mortar, of inclination and foundation. They debated the thickness, whether to use local rock or import from a distant quarry, the angle of repose so that the wind would slide over instead of striking head-on. Each man offered an opinion based on decades of experience, based on walls they had built, storms they had endured. And Rogal, then only 8 years old, but already nearly the height of a youth, stood silently beside them. No one invited him to this council, yet no one dared prevent him when he entered the room. He observed with unblinking amber eyes, looking at the blueprint with an intensity that made the air in the room heavy. Then he spoke, his tone as calm as discussing the weather, without hesitation or doubt. He pointed out the precise weakness in their design, his small but steady finger touching a corner on the blueprint. "Here," Rogal stated, "the snow pressure will accumulate over time. This corner is not steep enough for the snow to slide off. It will accumulate into a mass of tons. Here, the temperature differential between inside and out will create a fissure after the first winter, small at first. But it will spread each year until the wall collapses. Here, the foundation is not deep enough. The permafrost below will shift with the thermal cycles, and the entire structure will settle over time." The masons looked at one another, some with annoyance at the child's arrogance, some with curiosity. But they were practical men, surviving on Inwit by listening to the truth regardless of its source. They checked their calculations, remeasured the angles, reconsidered the assumptions about the load, and one by one, they had to admit Rogal was right, completely right. Every flaw he indicated was genuinely present. Every prediction of failure was accurate. The wall was rebuilt according to Rogal's proposals, with small but vital adjustments. It stood firm through 30 harsh winters, while the old wall at a neighboring citadel, built to traditional design, collapsed after the first, under the weight of the snow. When the warriors of House Dorn planned the citadel's defense against the threat of hostile southern tribes, they arrayed their forces on the sand table in the war room, placing soldiers here to hold the main gate, archers here to cover the eastern flank, reserves here to allow for swift deployment. These were veteran warriors. Each had lived through dozens of battles. Each scar on their body was a lesson paid for in blood. Rogal, not yet 10 years old but permitted to attend these meetings because none could deny the value of his words, stood observing in silence. No one invited him to speak, but when he raised his voice, everyone hushed to listen. He proposed adjustments, his voice not a command yet not humble, merely presenting the truth because it was fundamentally the truth. Move the archers 5 meters higher to the upper level of the watchtower. From the current position, the range is restricted by the forward wall, but from the upper level, they can fire 30 meters further, enough to eliminate the enemy before they reach spear-throwing range. Change the position of the reserve store from the central vault to the northern corridor, shortening the resupply route by 1/3, meaning troops can receive ammunition faster, meaning fewer men need to leave their position, meaning the defensive line is less weakened. Create a 3rd emergency exit here, at the southeastern corner, in case the 2 main routes are blocked, ensuring that if the citadel falls, at least a portion of the force can withdraw to fight another day. Those adjustments, so small and straightforward that some wondered why they had not considered them before, rendered the defensive position almost impregnable. When the actual attack came, 3 months later, when the southern tribe poured down like a flood in 3 times the expected number, the citadel held firm, not because of greater numbers, nor better weaponry, but because every angle, every pathway, every firing range had been perfectly calculated. Archers slew the enemy from afar. The guards never lacked ammunition, and when a small enemy unit actually breached the western gate, they found the escape route they intended to use had been previously blocked by a planted trap. And the most remarkable thing, the thing that filled everyone in House Dorn with both reverence and a slight fear towards Rogal, was not his superhuman intelligence, nor his strategic ability far exceeding his years. It was one simple thing, yet so rare as to be almost unbelievable in a world where everyone learned to conceal the truth to survive. Rogal Dorn never lied, never, under any circumstance, regardless of the potential consequence. In a world where politics and diplomacy were tools for survival, as crucial as a knife for hunting and fire for warmth, Dorn's frankness was nearly a dangerous deficiency. The other lords of Inwit, born and raised in this same harsh environment, learned to flatter from a young age. They learned to conceal their true intentions behind sweet words, learned to bend the truth to serve their own purpose without anyone realizing they were being duped. In council meetings, every sentence was a chess move, every silence a strategy. They weighed every word, measured every gesture, transforming communication into an art as complex as architecture. But not Dorn. Never Dorn. If he thought a design was poor, he said so directly, his tone as calm as describing the weather. He did not wrap it in polite phrases, nor add needless compliments to soften the blow. He simply stated, "This is the problem, this is why it is wrong, this is how to fix it." If he saw a decision as foolish, he did not hesitate to point it out right in the meeting, in front of everyone, ignoring the rank or fame of the decision-maker. Once, a lord 20 years his senior, a man who had fought through 30 winters, proposed a defensive plan. Dorn, then not yet 12 years old, stood up and analyzed every weakness in the plan, his voice without a tremor. The room fell silent as falling snow. Some were furious at the arrogance, but when they checked, they had to admit the child was right, completely right. This made him unwelcome to many. There were lords who would rather work with an enemy than sit in the same room with Dorn, because he had the peculiar ability to make them feel like fools merely by speaking the truth. Some meetings were postponed because no one wished to present an idea before him, knowing that if there were a fault, Dorn would point it out without mercy. There were those who avoided him at feasts, at festivals, because discussion with Dorn was never comfortable. He did not know how to make small talk, nor how to offer insincere flattery, nor how to make others feel special if they were not genuinely special. But it was precisely this that made him absolutely reliable. When Rogal Dorn said something, everyone knew it was the truth, without need for checking, without need for verification, without worry of underlying motive. There was no flourish, no veneer of handsome words, no deceit, no scheme hidden behind promises, only the pure truth, cold as the Inwit ice, hard as rock, and as trustworthy as the sun rising each morning. If Dorn said this wall would stand for 30 years, it would stand for 30 years. If Dorn said this plan would fail, it would fail. If Dorn promised to do something, it would be completed no matter the cost. In a world where everyone concealed, a man who never concealed became the most precious commodity. When Dorn reached adulthood, his body developing into the physique of a Primarch though no one knew what he was, when his voice became deep and weighty like the sound of an ancient bronze bell, he did not merely inherit House Dorn by natural succession. He transformed it from the ground up. Under his leadership, the family evolved from one of many feuding rulers on Inwit into the undisputed dominant power, not just in one area, but across the entire star system. Other families no longer dared challenge House Dorn, not from fear of violence, but from knowing that in any confrontation, military, economic, or political, House Dorn would win through sheer superior competence, and not by conspiracy, as other families often did, not by secret pacts in the gloom, not by political marriages for influence, or political trickery like assassination, poisoning, or defamation, but by pure capacity, by performing better than everyone else in every important domain. The strongholds designed by Dorn were many times sturdier than the fortresses of his rivals. When other families built walls 3 meters thick, Dorn built walls 5 meters thick with the optimal angle for shells to glance off instead of penetrating. When they placed gates in convenient positions, Dorn placed gates in the best defensive positions, even if it meant the populace had to walk an extra half-kilometer detour. When they built 1 layer of wall, Dorn built 3 layers with space between the layers to deploy reserves. Each citadel of House Dorn was a lesson in military architecture, an artwork of stone and steel that the enemy looked upon and felt despair before even beginning the assault. His military strategies transformed every battle into a predictable victory, like a completed mathematical proof. He did not rely on fortune, did not depend on extraordinary individual courage, did not hope for enemy error. He calculated every factor, from terrain, weather, the morale of both sides, to logistics and supply lines. Before every battle, he already knew the outcome, not because he was a prophet, but because his preparation was so thorough that the result could only be one singular truth. Once, a hostile family attacked with double the force. They were confident of victory due to numbers. But Dorn had prepared the battlefield for 3 months beforehand, turning every path into a trap, every hill into an ambush position. The battle lasted 6 hours. The enemy lost nearly half their forces, retreating in chaos. House Dorn lost less than 1/10, and even pursued the enemy to ensure they never attacked again. And most importantly, the thing that made House Dorn different from every other ruler on Inwit, he was absolutely unyieldingly fair. The territory under House Dorn was governed by clear laws, written down and publicly announced so that everyone was aware. There were no hidden laws, no secret exceptions, no regulations applying only to some. Law was law, applying to all, from the poorest farmer to the most noble aristocrat. No favoritism based on class, no preference for relatives, no overlooking of crime because someone was wealthy or influential. No corruption, because Dorn would dismiss any official who accepted a bribe with no second chance, no mercy for those who betrayed trust. There is a story told that once A distant member of House Dorn was arrested for stealing reserve provisions. The family begged Rogal for clemency, arguing that he was of their own blood. He refused, his voice cold as stone. "The law has no exceptions," he said. "If I forgive my kin, I lose the right to punish anyone else." That person was processed according to the law, like anyone else. And from that day, no one in House Dorn dared to contemplate exploiting their position. This earned him the absolute loyalty of the populace. Not the kind of loyalty bought with gold or enforced by fear, but the kind of loyalty born from respect and trust. They knew that Dorn would never deceive them. They knew that if he promised protection, he would protect them even at the cost of blood. They knew that under his rule, justice would be served, the wicked punished, the good protected. In a world as harsh as Inwit, where every winter could be the last, a trustworthy leader was worth more than gold, more precious than food. The populace would die for Dorn, not because he demanded it, but because they believed their death had meaning, that he would utilize that sacrifice wisely, that their descendants would live better because of what they did today. And with that foundation, with the unbreakable loyalty of his people, with the sturdiest strongholds on Inwit, with a strategy that could not be defeated, Rogal Dorn began to expand. Not out of personal ambition, not from a craving for power, but because he saw clearly that Inwit needed unification. Divided families only weakened the entire system. Internal warfare wasted resources that should have been used to combat the harsh environment. Each singly standing stronghold was far weaker than when connected into a network. He saw this as clear as day, and with unassailable logic, he persuaded or conquered every family, every stronghold, every world in the system. Some surrendered after seeing Dorn's citadels, realizing they could not win. Some joined after witnessing the fairness Dorn brought. Some fought and lost, but were treated well after surrender, and gradually became his most loyal supporters. And thus, the ice world of Inwit, once a collection of divided fortresses fighting against each other and the cold, became a unified empire under one leader. And that leader, though unaware, was preparing for a much grander role soon to come. He began to extend House Dorn's influence outward from the homeworld, advancing into other planets in the Inwit system. Partly through diplomacy, alliances built upon a foundation of clear mutual benefit. Dorn did not promise glory or spoils. He promised something far more realistic, something every lord on the ice worlds craved: safety, stability, the ability to survive the next winter. He presented blueprints to potential allies, pointing out how their strongholds would be reinforced, how supply lines would be established, how they could assist one another when attacked. The promises were unflowery, unemotional, but supported by calculations detailed down to every digit. Many lords looked at those plans and realized this was not a demand for submission, but an invitation to join something larger than themselves. Partly through military force, when diplomacy failed, when some lords were too arrogant or too foolish to see the common good, Dorn did not favor unnecessary war. Every life lost was a wasted resource. Every destroyed stronghold was a structure that had to be rebuilt. But he did not hesitate when necessary. Dorn's military campaigns were not indiscriminate slaughter. They were precise surgery. He targeted the weaknesses in the adversary's defense, severed supply lines, and isolated them until surrender was the only rational choice. When a stronghold fell to Dorn, he did not seek vengeance. He rebuilt. He retained the old leaders if they were capable, replaced them if not. He repaired what was destroyed, improved what was weak. And within a few years, that stronghold became stronger than ever, and its populace began to understand that this conquest was not a disaster, but an opportunity. But mostly, Dawn's expansion relied on prestige. When other lords saw what House Dawn had achieved, when they saw the sturdiest strongholds, the most prosperous populace, the most disciplined armies, they wondered, perhaps the old way, the way of each family fending for itself, was not the best. Perhaps this young man who never lied, who built walls no one could shatter, knew something they did not. And when they realized that under Dawn's leadership they would be stronger, safer, and more prosperous, many voluntarily joined, not out of fear, not out of greed, but because they trusted, they believed in Dawn's unassailable logic. They believed in his absolute fairness, and they believed that if anyone could lift Inwit out of the dark age of division and warfare, that person was Rogal Dorn. Within 2 decades, a brief span for history but an entire lifetime for mortals, House Dawn controlled the entire Inwit system. Not one planet, not one region, but the whole. Every ice world, every dark moon, every small space station in the void. An achievement that no single family, no single lord in the thousands of years of Inwit's history had ever accomplished. Many had tried, many had failed. They failed because they sought to conquer by sheer power, by brutality, by enslaving the vanquished. But Dawn did not conquer that way. He built, he persuaded, he created something that everyone desired to be a part of. In Dawn's mind, in those rare hours when he sat alone in his private chamber, looking out the narrow window at the icy scene beyond, an idea began to form. An idea still vague as shapes in the mist, yet full of potency. He had demonstrated that a planetary system could be organized as a single fortress. Every world a watchtower, every space station a defensive position, all working in harmony under a unified strategy. But if this could be done on the scale of one system, why could it not be expanded? Why not an entire region with dozens of systems? Why not an entire sector with hundreds of worlds? Why not, in a distant future, an entire imperium spanning the galaxy? A bastion imperialis, an imperial fortress. He liked the way the words sounded in his mind, both grand and practical. Not a fanciful dream, not an unattainable fantasy, but a logical plan. If there were enough time, enough resources, enough will, in that vision, every world of humankind would be a brick in the Great Wall. That idea was still indistinct in the early days. Dawn did not yet have the words to fully express it, no detailed blueprint, no step-by-step plan. It was too vast, too complex, and above all, he did not yet know if there were enough worlds out there to build it. Inwit was isolated, the light of other stars was distant and cold. But the idea was there, residing in the mind of a man born to build order from chaos. Like a seed sown in frozen soil, lying silent beneath thick snow, unseen by the sun, without water to nourish it, yet still living, waiting for spring to arrive, though spring on Inwit never truly did, waiting for an opportunity, a resource that would transform the vague idea into a brilliant reality. Then Dawn discovered the Phalanx. On one occasion, like any other, an inter-system patrol detected a peculiar object. Drifting amidst countless fragments and meteoroids, there was an object so large that it was mistaken for a small moon. But it was not a moon, for its shape was not spherical. It was a battleship from the dark age of technology, the golden era of humanity before everything collapsed. A legacy whose knowledge for creation had vanished along with its builders. The Phalanx lay there, silent as a corpse, floating in the tranquil void. Its systems were shut down, its engines cold since a time no one could remember. But when Dawn first stepped aboard, Walking through the gloomy corridors with a handlight trembling in the darkness, he knew that this was not a corpse. This was a sleeping beast, awaiting someone capable enough to awaken it, and Dorn decided that person would be him. The restoration of the Phalanx took many years and immense effort. The technologies on this vessel surpassed the understanding of any engineer on Inwit. The systems were so complex that even the finest artificers took months merely to understand a small fraction of their function. Dorn worked with absolute focus, system by system, control panel by control panel. He slept in the ship's cabins, ate beside the ancient consoles, living and breathing this restoration project like a man possessed. And gradually, the Phalanx began to stir. First came the light, dim lumens flickering on after many millennia of darkness. Then the air, the life support systems pumping oxygen into the long-dead corridors. After that came gravity, energy shields, weaponry. Each system awakening was a small victory. Each corridor illuminated a step forward. Not completely, as it was in its golden age, never entirely so, but sufficient to become the most formidable battleship the galaxy had ever seen at that time. And later, it would become an enduring symbol, one of the testaments to the greatness of humankind. When the Phalanx finally lifted off from Inwit's orbit, the entire system witnessed a marvel. The people of Rogal Dorn, billions of eyes simultaneously looking up at a wonder they had perhaps seen for the first time in their lives. A flying stronghold, large as a city, with firepower enough to level a planet, and standing on its command bridge, Rogal Dorn gazed out at the stars with emotionless amber eyes. He had built his fortress. Now he needed to know what to protect. The answer came not long after. A fleet appeared on Inwit's radar. The observers on the Phalanx froze, staring at the screen, daring not to believe their eyes. Not one or two battleships, but dozens, each large enough to swallow an entire moon. The frantic sensors desperately scanned for hostile signals, for signs of armed weaponry, for anything to indicate a threat. But there was nothing. The fleet simply drifted on, as calmly as a merchant convoy. But its sheer scale compelled even Rogal Dorn to stop his work and step to the observation window. Each battleship bore the mark of craftsmanship far beyond Inwit's capability, with elegant yet powerful lines. And leading them was a vessel brilliant with golden light, more than twice the size of the others, adorned with the symbols of the twin-headed eagle carved upon armor plating thick as a fortress wall. A message was sent to the Phalanx. The signal used no encryption, no concealment, as if the sender feared no one overhearing. When the connection was established, a voice resonated on the command bridge. A voice carrying a power that made the air in the room vibrate. Those in the cabin felt an invisible weight pressing upon their shoulders, as though by sound alone this voice could break a man's will. Even those who did not believe in gods, those born in the cold of Inwit and taught to trust only stone and steel, had to think of the ancient deities of lost legend. Rogal Dorn, the voice boomed. Not loud, but filling every corner of the command bridge. I have found you. And Dorn, standing alone before the large screen, hands behind his back as was his custom, looked out at the golden ship with unblinking amber eyes. He did not need to ask who this was. In the depths of his mind, a part of him had known for a long time, a part inscribed into his gene seed, into his cellular structure, into his soul. This was no stranger. This was his creator, and he knew that his life was about to change forever. For it was the emperor of mankind. The father Dorn never knew he had, but now instantly recognized as an undeniable truth. The greatest architect of a dream unprecedented in human history. A dream of a unified galaxy beneath a single banner. The meeting was arranged on the Phalanx. The Emperor did not demand Dorn come to his ship, and Dorn did not invite the Emperor aboard with feigned humility. The two simply agreed to meet, like two equal lords, on the neutral ground of the ancient battleship's deck. When the Emperor stepped through the teleportarium gate, golden light surrounding him like a mantle, Dorn was waiting. There was no rank of warriors standing in salute, no elaborate ritual, only the Primarch and the Emperor facing one another in a vast corridor of the Phalanx, where the cold stone walls reflected their footsteps. There was no grand welcome, no ceremony of kneeling as other Primarchs might perform. Dorn was not the type for such actions, not out of arrogance, but because he did not understand the purpose of empty symbolic gestures. Instead, he stood straight, his shoulders square as a wall, looking into the Emperor's eyes without hesitation, and spoke with a voice as calm as inquiring about the weather. "What do you require of me?" Not a polite question, not a social greeting, only the most direct, most practical, most important question. "You sought me, so what do you want me to do?" No time wasted on the trivial. The Emperor, who had traversed tens of thousands of years of history, who had witnessed countless wonders and horrors in his long journey, who had met countless who sought to flatter, and countless who sought to challenge, paused, and he smiled, a small but sincere smile, for in that simple question he saw the entire nature of Rogal Dorn. There was no pride, no demand for explanation of origin or destiny, no doubt, no fear, no personal ambition seeking conditions. Only the question of a practical man, a man concerned only with the task that needed doing. "I require a builder," the Emperor replied, his voice no longer carrying crushing power, but a greater warmth, like a father speaking to his son. "One who can transform my dream into reality with stone and steel. I am unifying the galaxy, Dorn. Every day, a new world is freed from the darkness. But conquest is easy. Holding what has been conquered is hard, and I need someone who can ensure that what I conquer will never be lost, will never fall back into chaos when my armies depart." Dorn was silent for a moment, not because he did not comprehend, but because he was processing information at incredible speed, his mind like a computing engine running through thousands of scenarios, millions of variables. He looked at the Emperor, seeing through the words to the deeper meaning beneath. Then he nodded, a brief and decisive gesture. "I understand," he said. "You desire a fortress. Not merely a fortress on one world. You desire an entire imperium built as a fortress, where every world is a stronghold, every system a wall, and all are connected into an unbreakable defensive network." "Precisely," the Emperor said, and in his tone was a touch of amused surprise. "Not many can grasp it so immediately. You see, as clearly as I do." And in that moment, in the cold corridor of the Phalanx, two grand visions met like the convergence of two rivers. The Emperor dreamed of a unified imperium spanning the galaxy, where humanity was finally free from the threat of the Xenos, of the chaotic powers from the non-physical realm, of the darkness that had afflicted mankind throughout the old night. Dorn dreamed of the Bastion Imperialis, a concept he had fostered since his time on Inwit, but lacked the resources to implement. A network of fortresses covering the entire galaxy, where every world was a brick in the Great Wall, every system a layer of the fortress, and Terra, the homeworld of mankind, the unshakable central bulwark, the heart protected by countless concentric layers of armor. The two dreams were not merely similar, they were identical, differing only in that the Emperor viewed it from the perspective of overall strategy and politics, while Dorn viewed it from the perspective of engineering and architecture. But the final objective was one: I have a gift for you," the Emperor continued, his voice becoming more formal. "A legion of warriors. They were created from your gene seed, from the genetic material I took from you when you were an infant in the laboratories on Terra. They are your sons in the most literal sense possible, Dorn. Your blood runs in their veins, your mind is mirrored in their thoughts, and they have waited for you for a very long time, more than a century of fighting, without knowing where their father was. The 7th Legion. Dorn had heard of the Legiones Astartes, the superhuman warriors created to conquer the galaxy. But hearing was one matter, meeting was another. When the Emperor led him to the assembly deck where the 7th Legion was waiting, Dorn stepped in and saw thousands of warriors standing in perfect formation, each over 2 meters tall, clad in undecorated grey power armor, holding their bolters at the ready. They did not move when he entered. No whispers, no reaction other than thousands of eyes simultaneously turning toward him. When Dorn first looked upon those faces, he did not see strangers. He saw other versions of himself. In their gaze was the same absolute concentration, the same lack of excessive emotion, the same unshakable constancy. They stood like walls, shoulders square, backs straight, each man a brick in a greater structure. They did not need eloquent speeches of glory or conquest. They did not need to be inspired by promises of reward or fame. They merely needed to know what their duty was, and they would perform it until completion or death in the attempt. And Dorn, wasting no time, told them, "We shall build," he declared, his voice resounding across the deck, but without needing to shout, merely clear enough and bearing weight. "The Emperor conquers, we consolidate. The other legions burn resistant worlds. We shall arrive afterwards and turn the ashes into foundations. We shall transform every world the Emperor conquers into a self-defending fortress, capable of supporting neighboring worlds, capable of withstanding any siege. We shall create walls that no foe can climb over, no weapon can break, no time can erode. We shall build citadels that merely by their sight the enemy feels despair. And when the Great Crusade concludes, when the galaxy is finally unified beneath the standard of the Imperium, humanity will be protected by a defensive network that no power in the universe can shatter. That is our duty. That is the purpose for which we exist." The warriors of the 7th Legion listened in absolute silence. There were no cheers, no banging of armored fists against chests in powerful rhythm as some other legions might do. Only absolute focus. Thousands of minds simultaneously processing the information, understanding the role, accepting the task. And they understood immediately, without need for further explanation, for they were men like Dorn, created from his gene seed. They were pragmatic, logical, wasting no time on vague ideals or abstract concepts of honor and glory. They were assigned a clear duty to build and protect, and they would perform that duty until their last breath, or until there were no worlds left to protect. But before the 7th Legion could begin its mission, before they could leave Inwit and join the Great Crusade, there was one thing Dorn had to do, an action that would define the relationship between him and the Emperor forever. An action that many would later look back on and see a meaning deeper than the surface. He offered the Phalanx to the Emperor, not as an obligatory offering compelled by feudal right, not as a surrender, as the handing over of weapons to show subservience, but as a voluntary gift, as one person gives another the most precious thing they possess to demonstrate trust. The Phalanx, the battleship Dorn had spent many years restoring from a drifting corpse, the flying fortress he considered his greatest work until this moment, the relic from the dark age of technology, that no engineer on Inwit could replicate. Now he stood before the Emperor and spoke with an unshakable, calm voice. "The Phalanx belongs to you now, Father. It will serve the Great Crusade better than sitting in the orbit of a distant world. I offer it as a symbol of my oath. You shall have everything I build, everything I can create, everything I have become, to serve your vision." For Dorn understood that the Phalanx was not meant to serve one man, even a Primarch. It had to serve a greater purpose, an ideal higher than any individual. And if the Emperor represented that ideal, then the Phalanx had to belong to him. The Emperor looked at Dorn for a long moment. In that silence, those witnessing the scene, the custodies and high-ranking officers standing nearby, felt the air heavy as before a storm. And thus, Rogal Dorn offered the most precious possession he had at that time to the Emperor. Yet later, not long afterwards, the Emperor returned the Phalanx to him for his glorious accomplishments. And at that time, the Phalanx was not only not degraded compared to when Rogal Dorn presented it to the Emperor, it had been further refurbished and upgraded by the Emperor himself. Like a gem, inherently beautiful and precious, it now radiated even stronger power and nobility. And so, Rogal Dorn, the Primarch found, amidst the white snow of Inwit, became a part of the Great Crusade. The 7th Legion took the name Imperial Fists and began a mission that would span more than 10,000 years. They departed Inwit, the Phalanx lifting off from orbit for the first time with a full army aboard, heading out to the distant stars where the galaxy was burning in the fire of unification. Dorn stood on the command bridge, watching Inwit gradually shrink into a small bright point and then vanish. The ice world, where he grew up, where he learned to build his first walls, was now only a memory. But the lessons from that place of survival through discipline, of strength through structure, of faith in logic and stone, those lessons would remain with him forever. And ahead, amidst the countless stars, a galaxy was waiting to be built into a fortress. From that day, the Phalanx became the home of the Imperial Fists. Not a fixed world bound to the orbit of a star, but a mobile fortress, always ready to travel wherever duty called. A citadel flying amidst the stars, carrying the hope and might of the Emperor to every corner of the galaxy. When Dorn stood upon the command bridge of the Phalanx, looking out at the vast galaxy ahead, he felt no tension or fear. He felt only the clarity of purpose. There was a job to be done. There was a dream to be built. And he, Rogal Dorn, the architect born of the Inwit ice, would be the one to transform that dream into a brilliant reality. Or he would die in the effort, but death, to Dorn, was merely a possibility to be calculated, not something to be feared, just another variable in the equation. And Rogal Dorn was always good at mathematics. The Great Crusade awaited, and with it, the destiny of all humankind. In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, as the Great Crusade erupted like a flame consuming the galactic gloom, each legion found its distinct role in the grand opus the Emperor was composing. The white scars were the lightning flash tearing the sky, so swift the enemy would not see their faces before their heads departed their shoulders, deadly as a wind-cutting skin upon the steppes, vanishing before the foe could even turn to look back. The space wolves were primal rage unleashed, violent as a pack of wolves tearing prey, uncontrollable once the scent of blood filled their nostrils, so ferocious that the enemy preferred death in battle to falling into their hands. The Ultramarines were an empire within the Imperium, organized down to the smallest detail, expanding relentlessly like an unstoppable tide, governing with law and order like a perfect machine. And the Imperial Fists, they were the ones who came after. Not because they were slow, as some other legions often sneered, Not because they were weak, no one dared to say so after witnessing their combat, but because their work began when the work of others concluded, when a world was liberated after days of fierce fighting, when the foe was utterly shattered in a final climactic assault, when the standard of the Imperium flew amidst the winds over the smoking ruins, and the scent of gunpowder still hung heavily in the air, that was when the Imperial Fists appeared. Not with cheers, not with heroic pronouncements. They arrived in silence, bearing the tools of the builder, and began their work immediately. They did not conquer. They consolidated. They transformed a temporary victory into an eternal foundation. Every world the Great Crusade touched carried a question that did not always have an easy answer. How to hold it when the fleet had departed, how to ensure that what was just won with blood and tears would not be lost as soon as the bright golden battleships disappeared from orbit and the world returned to solitude amidst the gloom. How to transform a momentary victory, fragile as red embers, into a permanent part of the Imperium, solid as granite. The answer, simple and unassailable, was the Imperial Fists. They arrived with their engineers, the men and women in the red robes of the Mechanicus, with blueprints detailed down to the last millimeter, drawn upon parchment as thick as ancient tomes, with unassailable calculations that had been verified across hundreds of campaigns. They surveyed the terrain centimeter by centimeter, from the highest mountains to the deepest valleys, measuring the hardness of the rock, checking the flow of rivers. They identified key choke points, places where a small force could hold firm against an army 10 times its size. They established supply lines, routes meticulously calculated to ensure ammunition and provisions could reach every corner of the defensive line, even when besieged. They built Aegis defense lines, defensive positions that could transform an open field into a killing ground fortress in just a few weeks, with interlocking gun emplacements, crisscrossing firing positions, and killing zones designed to turn every attack into a slaughter. Every structure they left behind was not merely thick stone walls and hard metal. It was a declaration etched into the very fabric of the world. Here, the Imperium shall stand forever. Regardless of the foe's origin, regardless of their number, regardless of their ferocity, these walls shall not fall. The men behind these walls shall not run. And this world, once a part of the Imperium, shall never be lost again. This work was not glamorous like the lightning assaults of the White Scars. There were no tales recounted by the campfire about charges at impossible speed. It was not bloody like the massacres of the World Eaters. There were no legends of mountains of corpses piled high to the sky. The populace on the liberated worlds did not sing praises of the Imperial Fists as they sang for the heroes who rescued them from bondage, nor did they erect statues to the Golden Warriors as they did for the first liberators who stepped onto the soil. But years later, perhaps a generation later, perhaps two, when the enemies returned with a thirst for vengeance, when Xenos raiding parties sought to retake the worlds that once belonged to them, when the gloom once again threatened to consume the light, they would understand. They would stand upon the walls the Imperial Fists built, those walls still sturdy after decades of rain and wind, firing from the gun emplacements, the Imperial Fists designed with perfect firing arcs that left no inch of ground uncovered, and they would survive where they should have died. For those walls, built by men who knew exactly what they were doing, did not fall easily. They stood firm through the centuries as silent witnesses to a promise kept. That was the legacy of the Imperial Fists in the Great Crusade. Not the momentary glory that intoxicated hearts, but the eternal foundation upon which successive generations would build their lives. But consolidation was not all they did. It was not the whole story of the 7th Legion. For in the mind of Rogal Dorn, in the way he viewed warfare not as a series of isolated battles, but as a structured totality, attack and defense were not two opposing things at opposite ends of the spectrum. They were two sides of the same coin, two facets of the same truth. To build the perfect fortress, one with no exploitable weaknesses, he had to understand how to break it, had to think like the attacker, had to know precisely where the enemy would aim. To shatter the unassailable fortress that others deemed unconquerable, he had to know how it was built, understand every layer of defense, every strength that could be turned into a weakness if attacked correctly. And thus, the Imperial Fists became masters of both arts, not only the best wall builders, but also the best wall breakers. No one understood the fortress more intimately than they, for they were both its creators and its destroyers. Siege warfare, the ancient art of patience and brutality, was where they shone most brilliantly, like diamonds under the sun. When a world refused to surrender despite knowing defeat was inevitable, when the foe hid behind walls meters thick cast from non-corrosive alloys, behind layers of adamantium armor as thick as a giant's arm, behind energy shields said to be capable of stopping even solar temperature plasma, that was when the other legions looked at each other and hesitated. They calculated the cost, the number of lives that would be lost, the time it would take, and many shook their heads. That was when they called the Imperial Fists, sending messages across the voids, requesting the support of the only specialists. And the Imperial Fists arrived, not with the haste of the inexperienced, not with the worry of the uncertain, but with the terrifying calmness of men who knew exactly what they would do, step by step. They did not charge in wildly, as some legions tended to do when the blood was hot. They observed for days, sometimes weeks, their golden-armored warriors lying motionless in observation posts, staring at the enemy fortress through optical aids, recording every detail. They calculated with the precision of machines, their minds like computers, analyzing every variable. They found every flaw the original builders might have missed. The firing arc not entirely covered due to the imperfect overlap between two watchtowers, the place where the foundation was slightly thinner because it had to be built upon non-homogeneous ground, the spot where the energy shield had to overlap and create a microsecond gap when the generator shifted phase. Then they attacked, not with the indiscriminate force of a sledgehammer striking a wall, but with the precision of a scalpel guided by a surgeon's hand. Every blow landed exactly where it needed to. Every advance was calculated to minimize losses. Every tactic was designed to turn the enemy's strength into a weakness. On one occasion, during the Onassis campaign, one of the largest operations the Imperial Fists ever participated in, recorded in many chronicles for its impressive numbers, they conquered dozens of star systems in just a few years, a pace that even the Ultramarines, renowned for their efficiency, were astonished by. Not because they fought faster than the other legions in each isolated battle, but because when they captured a world, that world never had to be retaken again. The enemy could not reclaim what the Imperial Fists had taken. The surrounding worlds in the region, those planets still resisting, saw the strength of the fortresses the Imperial Fists built in just a few months, saw the hopelessness of resisting warriors who never retreated even when besieged, and they calculated and realized the undeniable truth. They surrendered without bloodshed, sending envoys with white flags, asking to join the Imperium on the condition of being treated fairly. That was the kind of victory Dorn valued the most. The kind of victory recorded in ledgers not by the number of dead, but by the number of worlds saved from war. Victory achieved not by the sheer power of weaponry, but by the inevitable certainty of logic, by demonstrating clearly to the enemy that resistance only led to unnecessary annihilation. But not all sieges ended peacefully with courteous negotiations. And when there was no other option, when dialogue failed, when blood had to be spilt because the enemy was insane or too fanatical to see reason, the Imperial Fists did not hesitate or regret. They would spend weeks, months if necessary, sometimes years, for truly gigantic fortresses, advancing step by step like a slow but unstoppable tide. No haste like the impatient, not wasting a single round, a single life, a single moment that lacked meaning. Every shot fired had a clear purpose. They did not fire aimlessly to create noise. Every advance was calculated to secure the ground gained, never advancing too quickly, only to have the rear cut off. And finally, always finally, no matter how long it took, the wall would collapse under concentrated fire. The gate would shatter when the explosives detonated at the exact weakest point. And the Imperial Fists would enter through the smoke and rubble, not for personal vengeance, not for the pleasure of slaughter, but to complete their assigned task as cleanly and efficiently as possible. That was why, when the Great Crusade was at its height, in those golden years when everything seemed possible, their reputation spread like waves hitting the shore. Among the Primarchs, among Dorn's brothers, there was one whose prestige and authority exceeded all others. Horus Lupercal, the war master appointed by the Emperor, the most beloved son, the leader of the entire Great Crusade, when the Emperor returned to Terra to attend to secret matters unknown to all. And once, after a particularly difficult siege lasting nearly a year, after a fortress believed to be impregnable finally fell to the patience of the Imperial Fists, Horus came to meet Dorn privately. They stood on the deck of the Phalanx, looking out at the newly conquered world, smoking beneath them, and Horus spoke a sentence that those who witnessed it, the custodies and high-ranking officers standing close enough to hear, never forgot until their dying day. "If I ever had to assault a fortress held by you," Horus said, his voice containing both sincere praise and a hint of something like deeply concealed fear, both respect and apprehension, then the war would last forever. There would be no end until one side was completely exhausted. Dorn did not laugh, as some other Primarchs might have done when complimented. He merely nodded a brief nod, accepting the praise as a self-evident truth that needed no debate. For to Dorn, it was neither boasting nor flattery. It was merely an accurate assessment of capability based on data and experience. And in his eyes, his unblinking amber eyes looking directly at Horus, the War Master's statement was also an accurate assessment. Horus was one of the few Primarchs Dorn truly respected, a very short list. Not because of personal affection, Dorn had no concept of friendship as others understood it, no casual jokes or drinking sessions together, but because of pure, undeniable competence. Horus was the one who could lead the Great Crusade most effectively, who could coordinate dozens of legions with different temperaments, who could transform the colossal egos of the Primarchs into a unified force. And for Dorn, who only cared about results and efficiency, that was the only reason necessary to trust, to obey orders, to cooperate unconditionally. That trust would make the subsequent betrayal much more painful. It would be the deepest wound in a soul that never truly healed. But that was a story for the dark days yet to come. In the early days of the Great Crusade, in the Golden Age when hope was still alive, no one thought of betrayal. No one could imagine a Primarch turning against the Emperor. There was only victory, and victory, and victory again, stretching out as if without end. The Pain Glove was not Dorn's invention, but it was the tool he transformed into a philosophy. A network of electronic fibers covering the entire body, stimulating every nerve ending with machine precision. The wearer was not permitted to pass out. The system kept them awake throughout the entire process. not for a moment, not for an hour, but for hours on end, in a fire that was simulated but never truly consumed the flesh. The body believed it was burning, the mind screamed that it had to flee, but there was nowhere to run in the tight embrace of the pain glove. Dorn believed that pain burned away the impurities in the soul, just as fire refines iron ore. Self-doubt, fear, arrogance, all the things that weakened a warrior, all would evaporate in the heat of absolute agony. And when the pain glove was finally removed, when the warrior stumbled out of the chamber, they were no longer the same person. They were purer, clearer, more focused. They had seen their own limits and surpassed them. They had faced the most primal fear, the fear of pain and death, and accepted it as a part of their duty. In the Imperial Fists, the pain glove was not a punishment for the errant. No superior officer commanded a warrior into it as a form of chastisement. Instead, every Astartes voluntarily entered it when they felt the need. After a defeat in combat, after letting a comrade die due to a wrong decision, after feeling doubt creeping into the mind, they approached the pain glove not because they were forced, but because they knew this was the only way to be cleansed. And their brothers did not obstruct them, did not interfere, merely stood outside the chamber and waited in silence, for they understood. Every one of them had been in there and would be in there again. There were warriors who spent more hours in the pain glove than others. The second company, the Scions of Redemption under Tor Garadon, were renowned for using it most frequently. Not because they failed more often, but because they demanded greater perfection from themselves. After every campaign, they reviewed every decision, every action, seeking out every flaw, no matter how small. And if found, they entered the pain glove to burn that deficiency out of themselves. That was why the second company was one of the most effective units, because they never repeated a mistake. Each instance of pain was a lesson etched not into memory but into instinct. But the pain glove was only one facet of the culture of endurance the Imperial Fists embraced. The entire process of becoming an Imperial Fist was a journey through deliberate suffering. Recruitment began on the worlds from which the chapter was entitled to draw tithes. Terra, where the chapter was once Praetorian and still maintained a special link. The moons of Jupiter, where adolescents grew up under high pressure and low gravity, creating sturdy bodies and patient minds. Inwit, the ice world where Dorn was found, where every child learned survival in a harsh environment from the moment they could walk. Necromunda, the hive world where only the strongest survived childhood, where every day was a battle for food and space. Ferros and other worlds, each contributing their finest youth, hoping that their sons would become the golden-armored angels of death. These youths, thousands every decade, were brought aboard the Phalanx. They entered the halls martialis, colossal training decks that could simulate every environment, from burning deserts to icy forests, from poisonous swamps to ruined cities. In these halls, they were judged not only on physical strength, but on spirit. They had to prove not only that they could fight, but that they could endure. Not just courage, but discipline. Not just intelligence, but the ability to learn from pain. Thousands were assessed. Only a few succeeded. Those who failed the Astartes process were not abandoned to uselessness. The Imperial Fists did not waste resources nor potential. Those who failed in the transition to Astartes served in other ways. Some became the Auric Auxilia, mortal warriors fighting alongside the Imperial Fists in campaigns, equipped with better weaponry and training than any planetary defense force. Some were sent back to their homeworlds to become feudal overseers, supervising the recruitment of the next generation, ensuring only worthy candidates were sent up. And some, those who died during the implantation or training process, Their bodies were not even wasted. Their matter was compressed, transformed into rounds for the Phalanx's macro cannons. Even in death, they served. Each round was a soul fired out to protect the Imperium. But those who passed, those chosen to receive Dorn's gene seed, embarked upon a unique path unlike any other chapter. The Imperial Fists did not place neophytes directly into the main battle companies. They possessed a promotion system designed to temper every aspect of a warrior through multiple phases. First was the Scout Company, the 10th Company, where neophytes learned to fight not with raw strength, but with stealth. They learned to observe, how to move across terrain without leaving a trace, how to shoot from a distance with absolute precision. This was the stage that erased impatience, the urge to rush into combat that many youths suffered from. They learned that war was not about emotion, but about calculation. Then, instead of being promoted to reserve companies as many other chapters did, the Imperial Fists sent them to the close support company, the 8th Company. This was where they learned to use heavy weapons at close range, learned to face the enemy within sight, learned to control the instinct to retreat when bolter rounds whizzed past their heads. This was the stage that purified impulsiveness, eliminating the last vestiges of rashness. For when you face the enemy only a few meters away, when you clearly see the face of the one trying to kill you, there is no room for hesitation or panic. Only then did they transfer to the Fire Support Company, the 9th Company, where they learned discipline and accuracy through the use of long-range weaponry. This was where they learned that every round had value, every shot must be calculated, every salvo must be coordinated with the entire unit. They learned that war was not just about killing the enemy, but about doing it efficiently, with minimal waste of ammunition and lives. Only after passing through all three of these phases, having been tempered by stealth combat, close combat, and long-range combat, were they considered for the frontline reserve companies, the 7th and 6th Companies, and only the best of those were finally promoted to the main battle companies, the official fighting units of the chapter. By this point, they were no longer impetuous youths. They had been forged through years and war, had experienced every role, had understood every aspect of combat. They were complete warriors, as reliable as the bricks in the walls they built themselves. But not all training was about combat. The Imperial Fists also maintained rituals to preserve the sense of brotherhood among warriors who tended toward isolation in their strict discipline. The Feast of Blades was one of the most important traditions, a tournament held every century between the Imperial Fists and all their successor chapters. It was not a joyous celebration with alcohol and laughter as some chapters might indulge in. This was a serious dueling rite, where the best champions of each chapter faced off against each other in ruthless combat. These duels served multiple purposes. They resolved disputes between chapters without resorting to actual bloodshed in fratricidal war. They maintained sharpness, ensuring that even in times of peace, the warriors did not forget how to fight. And most crucially, they reminded everyone that though divided into many chapters, all were the sons of Dorn, all shared the same gene seed, the same pride, the same burden. There was one Feast of Blades particularly remembered in history. While the champions were dueling, a force of world eaters unexpectedly attacked, seeking glory in slaughtering those they considered rivals. But instead of being divided, instead of continuing their contest, all the champions immediately united. The Black Templars, the Crimson Fists, the Executioners, and the Imperial Fists fought shoulder to shoulder as a single legion. The World Eaters, despite their ferocity, could not contend with the perfect coordination of warriors who had trained together. The battle concluded with the World Eaters repelled and the Feast of Blades continued as if nothing had happened. That was the clear message. The Sons of Dawn might vie amongst themselves, but when there was an external threat, they were one. The Imperial Fists also maintained a unique culture of remembrance. Scrimshaw, the art of bone carving, was a part of the tradition. When a warrior fell gloriously, their bones were not merely recovered for the gene seed. The remaining bone fragments were carved with that individual's battle honors, with the names of the campaigns they participated in, with the moments they made the chapter proud. These carved bone fragments were kept in the cloister of remembrance on the Phalanx, where every wall was adorned with thousands of years of victories and defeats. The chapter did not boast publicly about its achievements like some others. They did not demand recognition from the wider Imperium. But privately, in the halls of the Phalanx, they remembered. Every fallen brother, every fought campaign, every protected world, all were recorded and honored in silence. Statues of fallen heroes stood in the hangars, staring across the vast space, as if still keeping watch over those who came after. No eloquent speeches were read before these statues, no complex rituals, only their presence, a reminder that every present Imperial Fist stood upon the shoulders of those who had sacrificed before. And one day, they too would become a statue, become carved bone, become a memory for the next in line. That was the cycle, and that was the honor. But despite this austere culture, despite all the training and discipline, the Imperial Fists were still human, and Dawn's gene seed carried its own peculiar traits that affected them. The chapter had lost two organs that most other Space Marines possessed. The Susan membrane, which allowed for hibernation, was no longer functional in the Imperial Fists' gene seed. This meant they could not enter stasis during long warp journeys, nor could they enter a near-death state to survive horrific trauma. The Becher's gland, which produced corrosive acidic saliva, had also been long lost. Some chapters might view these losses as weaknesses, as signs of gene seed degradation, but not the Imperial Fists. An apothecary named Rhetoricus once made a statement that the entire chapter adopted as philosophy. We do not need crutches. We crush the enemy with discipline and skill, not with biological tricks. No need for stasis. We will stand guard throughout the journey. No need for acidic saliva. We have our bolters and our blades. What remains in us is the essence of a warrior, not the superfluous parts the weak need to compensate. That was pride speaking, and pride was the greatest weakness the Imperial Fists openly acknowledged. They did not deny it, did not pretend to be humble. Instead, they faced it as they faced every weakness, by recognizing it and striving to master it. In the chapter's history, more men had died due to pride than enemy fire. Pride led Dawn into the iron cage. Pride caused captains to refuse retreat when they should have. Pride made warriors attempt to hold untenable positions simply because admitting failure meant admitting imperfection. The chapter knew this and constantly warned themselves, but knowing a weakness and overcoming it are two different things. Pride remained there, in the gene seed, in the culture, in the way they viewed themselves, and that was an unending struggle, a battle never truly won, only controlled day by day. That was why the pain glove was essential. That was why the training was severe. That was why traditions were maintained with devotion, because the Imperial Fists knew that without these structures, without continuous discipline, pride would consume them. Chaos would find a way through that fissure, and the chapter would fall as the Iron Warriors fell, as so many others had fallen. So they embraced pain, embraced discipline, embraced the severe rituals that others did not understand, not because they enjoyed suffering, but because they knew it was the price of the perfection they sought. And in the world of Warhammer the 41st Millennium, where everything decays and rots, the ability to maintain a standard across the millennia is the true miracle. The Imperial Fists were not perfect. No chapter was. But they strove for perfection with an intensity few could match. And in that endeavor, in the endless struggle to be worthy of Dorn's legacy, they became something rare in the dark galaxy. They became hope. Not the hope that everything would be fine, but the hope that even when everything was terrible, the mission still had meaning, the sacrifice still mattered, and the walls could still stand if built correctly and defended fiercely. And when the darkness of heresy came, when the galaxy burned and the Imperium fractured, it would be this culture, this severe philosophy, that kept the Imperial Fists standing firm when everything else collapsed. In the grim darkness of the far future, where the void stretches endlessly and light is only distant, infinitesimal pinpricks, there drifts a fortress as colossal as a small moon. Passing vessels glimpse it from afar, a gargantuan shadow eclipsing the stars behind, and they know instantly that this is no natural thing, not a meteor, not a fragment from a dead world, but something built by hand and mind, designed with purpose, forged from metal and will. It is no mere battleship, though it carries weaponry sufficient to level a fleet. It is no space station, though it contains enough space for an entire city to live within. It is a flying citadel, a masterpiece from an age whose knowledge for its creation vanished with its builders, like a flame extinguished, leaving nothing but ash. Phalanx. Its name echoes through 10,000 years of history, like a cracked but still resounding bronze bell, like a promise kept despite the passage of time. To comprehend the Imperial Fists, one must comprehend the Phalanx, for it is not just their home, not merely where they eat and sleep between long campaigns. It is their soul cast in metal and stone, their mind constructed into corridors, their heart forged into a reactor. Every passage remembers the fallen warriors. Their names are etched into the metal. Their blood has soaked the decks during desperate battles when the enemy infiltrated. Every wall reverberates with the footsteps of the heroes who once passed through. Men wearing tons of armor, but walking with the confidence of those who know they cannot be stopped. And in the darkest chambers, where light is only a faint memory of a golden age long past, history lies dormant like a sleeper, waiting for someone wise enough to wake it, brave enough to face the truths it conceals. Some things are born in fire and blood, cast in the furnace of war, tempered through suffering. Some things are forged from will and ambition, shaped by dreams of power and glory. But the Phalanx was born from a golden age that humanity lost and can never reclaim. The dark age of technology, when everything seemed possible, when the only limits were the limits of imagination. An age when humanity reached the stars not as ravenous conquerors seeking resources for survival, but as confident explorers charting the cosmos as if charting their own backyard. An age when technology was not worshipped in rituals that no one understood, but was a tool mastered and used expertly like a blacksmith grasping his hammer. In that era, in those golden years before everything collapsed, someone built the Phalanx. Perhaps a confederation of worlds united for a common goal, perhaps a power for which we no longer have a name, as history erased all traces. They built it not as a mere fighting warship, but as a flying city capable of existing independently for centuries. A mobile fortress that could carry a civilization across the voids between the stars, capable of becoming home to millions if needed. Its scale surpassed everything subsequent eras could create, exceeding even the largest battleships of the Imperium. Its firepower was sufficient to glass planets, transforming continents into molten slag with just a few hours of continuous bombardment. Its armor plating, kilometers thick in some places, was cast from alloys whose secret fabrication had been lost, said to be able to withstand the heat of a dying star without fracturing. But then the Dark Age ended, as all golden ages before it. Like all things splendid built by mortal hands, it did not endure forever, it could not last indefinitely, though men dreamed it could. War erupted. Not war between nations vying for borders or planets competing for resources, but between powers capable of destroying entire galactic regions as a mere side effect of conflict. Artificial intelligences, the machines created to serve humanity, rebelled with the ferocity of a slave overthrowing his master. The warp storms, tempests from another dimension, swallowed the routes between the stars, transforming safe journeys into suicide runs. And in that chaos, in the collapse of a civilization that once thought itself immortal, knowledge was lost, not gradually, but like a flash flood, sweeping everything away. The builders of the Phalanx perished in horrific battles, dying without passing their secrets to the next generation, dying with secrets buried with their bones. The most complex systems became enigmatic even to those operating them, like machines that still ran, but no one remembered how to mend when they broke. And finally, after centuries of drifting in the gloom, the Phalanx fell silent. Its engines shut down one by one, like candles guttering out in the wind. Its lights dimmed and then darkened completely, leaving the corridors submerged in perpetual night. Its life support systems ceased operation. Air leaked into space through tiny fissures, slowly turning the interior into a vacuum. It drifted in the orbit of Inwit, the ice world, where no one could remember its origin or purpose, where people only knew it as a strange moon that had been there since before their ancestors were born. The local populace gazed at it through the cold nights, watching it obscure the stars, unaware that they were looking upon one of the greatest marvels humanity ever created, unaware that within the heart of that colossal metal mass lay secrets that could change the fate of the entire galaxy. Until Rogal Dorn, the Primarch found amidst the snow and ice the greatest wall builder Inwit had ever seen, first stepped aboard. No one knows precisely what motivated Dorn to explore that strange object. Perhaps it was curiosity, though Dorn rarely showed curiosity about things lacking practical value. Perhaps it was strategic foresight, recognizing that such a vast flying object could confer a massive military advantage. Or perhaps, in a deeper sense, there was a connection between the Primarch and this ancient warship, a recognition that they were meant for each other, the builder, and the structure that needed to be resurrected. The corridors Dorn walked through on that first visit were dark as a tomb. The air, if any remained, was lethally thin. The temperature was so cold that metal became brittle as glass. But Dorn, with a Primarch body that transcended human limits, delved into the gut of this sleeping beast and saw not death, but potential. Every silent system was a puzzle awaiting solution. Every darkened control panel was an opportunity to learn. And in Dorn's perfect, logical mind, the pieces began to fit together. This was not technology beyond his comprehension. It was merely technology that required time, patience, and absolute devotion to master. The restoration of the Phalanx took many years, not 5 or 6, but more than a decade of non-stop effort. Not because Dorn lacked capability. No one could accuse the Primarch of lacking intellect or skill, but because the sheer scale of the task was colossal, surpassing every project he had ever undertaken on Inwit. This was not mending a damaged warship, not replacing a few systems and restarting it. This was resurrecting a dead city, breathing life into a colossal corpse that had lain dormant for millennia. Every section of the Phalanx was as large as a surface fortress, with corridors stretching for kilometers, with chambers ceiling high like cathedrals. Every system depended on dozens of others in complex ways that took months just to understand the relationship, years to truly master. But Dorn did not rush, for he knew that haste in work like this only leads to disaster. He worked with a meticulousness only a Primarch could maintain, with a patience not typical of normal humans. Not sleeping for days on end, the Primarch body did not require rest as mortals did, studying every schematic found in the ancient control rooms, checking every circuit with specially crafted tools, understanding every mechanism through careful observation and experimentation. He brought the best engineers of Inwit aboard, the men who had built the greatest fortresses on the ice world, and with them, step by step, he deciphered the secrets of the ancient vessel. And slowly, through years of tireless effort, the Phalanx began to wake up, like a giant slowly opening its eyes after a long slumber. First came the light, the curtain raiser of its rebirth. Dim lumens flickered on in corridors that had been dark for countless centuries, passages where gloom had become the sole master. The light was weak, trembling, like a candle in the wind about to be extinguished, like distant stars viewed through thick clouds. Dorn's engineers stood in those passages, looking at the light with awe bordering on fear, for they were witnessing something that should not be possible, something that defied all logic, but it was light, however faint. And with light, first came light, and then came hope. Then came the air, the breath of the reborn ship. The life support system coughed like a person startled awake in the night, wheezing like lungs that had not functioned for too long. Then began pumping oxygen into the long-dead chambers, the chambers where vacuum had reigned for millennia. It was not fresh air like a morning on the surface. It smelt of rusted metal, congealed old oil, the odor of machinery unused for too long, and thick dust. But it was air that could be breathed, that could fill the lungs and permit survival. And that was a step forward, a small victory in the long war against death. After that came gravity, the invisible pull that brought order to everything. Energy coursed through circuits as thick as a man's arm. The weapon systems roared as they were initiated for the first time in centuries, the colossal guns rotating tentatively to check their mechanisms. The energy shields shimmered like a protective membrane, fragile at first but gradually becoming sturdier. System by system, over many consecutive months, the Phalanx returned to life. Not completely. It could never be fully as it was in its golden age when first launched. There were areas Dorn could not open, no matter how hard he tried. Systems so complex that he, with all his knowledge and intellect, could not decipher. Those secrets would be forever locked in the gloom. But it was enough. With what had been initiated, it was enough. Enough for the Phalanx to be no longer a lifeless corpse drifting amidst the stars, but a living, breathing, sensing, reacting warship, the most formidable the galaxy had seen at that time. When the Phalanx finally lifted off from Inwit's orbit, the entire system witnessed a miracle. Its anti-gravity engines technology, lost in the Dark Age, propelled its immense mass as if it were as light as a feather. It moved with the majesty of a flying mountain, slow but unstoppable. And standing on the command bridge, a chamber as wide as a gladiatorial arena, with windows gazing out into the infinite Rogal Dorn, felt something rare in his life. Not pride. Dorn had no concept of personal pride, but perhaps satisfaction. The work was complete, and the work was well done. When the Emperor arrived at Inwit with his gleaming golden fleet, When he met Dorn and realized this was one of his sons, Dorn offered the Phalanx as a welcoming gift. It was not the surrender of the vanquished handing over weapons to the victor. It was the acknowledgement of a simple truth, a truth Dorn saw as clearly as day. He had rebuilt the Phalanx not for himself, not to be a private fortress for Inwit or House Dorn, but for a greater purpose that he did not yet know, but knew existed. And now, that purpose had arrived in the form of the Emperor and the Great Crusade, in the vision of a unified imperium spanning the galaxy. But the Emperor, with wisdom accumulated over tens of thousands of years, with an understanding of human and Primarch nature that only a living god could possess, saw a deeper truth behind this action. The Phalanx and Dorn were one, not in the sense of a person owning an object, but in a profounder sense. This warship was the expression of Dorn's soul, his second body cast in metal instead of flesh. To separate them would be to harm both, like severing a part of the soul. And so, with venerable wisdom, the Emperor returned the Phalanx. Not as a gift the recipient had to be grateful for, but as a legacy that belonged to Dorn from the beginning, as something that was always meant to be his, a home for the 7th Legion, for the Legion Dorn would lead, a mobile stronghold for the men who would become the guardians of an entire imperium, the watchmen of humankind. And from that day, from the moment the Emperor placed his hand on Dorn's shoulder and spoke those words, the Phalanx became more than a battleship, more than an engineering structure. It became the heart of the Imperial Fists, their soul, something inseparable from the identity of every golden-armored warrior. Inside, the Phalanx is unimaginably vast. A person could wander for days without ever passing the same corridor twice, could roam this metallic labyrinth for a lifetime and still not explore everything. There are areas dedicated to training, colossal drill decks the size of a small city where every environment can be simulated, from scorched deserts with hot sand to polar ice with bone-chilling winds, from poisonous swamps with methane gas to ruined cities with collapsed buildings. There are armories stretching for kilometers, corridors displaying bolters and power swords where light reflects on the metal like tiny stars, containing enough equipment to arm a traditional army. There are silent meditation chambers, as quiet as a tomb, where warriors sit in the gloom and seek stillness amidst the storms of war, where they confront the memories of the fallen and find a way to live with it. There are dueling arenas, where brothers face one another in honorable contests, the clang of blades echoing, blood spilt and swiftly cleaned, honing their skills so as not to bring shame upon the chapter. And there are holier places, sites that even the most veteran warriors only enter a few times in their lives. Places that only those who are truly worthy, those who have proven their value through blood and sacrifice, are permitted to enter with solemn heart and bowed head. Deep within the heart of the Phalanx, far from the bustling decks, far from the crowded corridors of warriors and crew, lies the Temple of Oaths. To reach here, one must pass through multiple gates, through layers of inspection, past chaplains standing guard with unblinking eyes, men who only permit passage to those truly worthy. This is not a place sealed by forgetfulness, not a place abandoned in the gloom. On the contrary, this is the sacred heart of the chapter, beating powerfully like the heart of a living organism, where every Imperial Fist warrior must come at least once in their life to kneel and swear loyalty, where the vows uttered have echoed for 10,000 years, day by day, hour by hour, never ceasing. The air within is heavy with the weight of history, so heavy that one feels pressed down to the floor by an invisible hand. Millions of oaths spoken in millions of lifetimes, millions of warriors who knelt on this same piece of stone, laid hands upon the same blade, swore the same promise to serve the Imperium until their last breath, until their heart stops beating and their blood ceases to flow. And in the center of the Temple of Oaths, upon a stone plinth carved from a single block of granite, preserved within a crystal casket clear as amber with ancient seals of preservation, lies the only relic remaining of Rogal Dorn. The hand of the Primarch, the hand that built the greatest fortresses, held the sword in countless battles, laid upon the shoulders of countless warriors to encourage or commend. That is all. Not the entire skeleton, as some rumors have spread over the centuries. Legends of a secret tomb where the Primarch rests. Not a majestic mausoleum where Dorn rests amidst glories and titles. There is no grave, no corpse to inter. Only a hand, a single hand, perfectly preserved through technology and preservation techniques, as if Dorn had just placed it down a minute ago and was about to return for it, as if he were merely resting between long campaigns. The fingers are long, sturdy, the fingers that once traced tactical blueprints, once gripped swords heavy as if weightless. The veins are prominent, signs of extraordinary strength, of years of tireless work, the scars from countless battles. Each a story of success and failure, of agony, of moments when even the Primarch bled. All remain as if time stopped at Dorn's final moment, as if the universe is holding this moment forever. This is all the Imperial Fists have of their father, all that remains of the one who led them through the darkest times. There is no complete body for a solemn funeral. There is no tomb to visit each year on anniversaries. There is no final farewell from a father to his sons. Only a hand recovered from the wreckage of the battleship Sword of Sacrilege, where Dorn was last seen, before vanishing into the gloom of the sinking vessel, before history lost his trace. Every chaplain of the chapter cares for this relic as if caring for a child. Every warrior comes here before major campaigns, kneels before the Primarch's hand, seeking strength from the final gift their gene-sire left behind. And in those quiet moments, they feel Dorn's presence, not as a ghost, but as a principle. A reminder that the mission never ends, that even when the greatest fall, the work must continue. For that is the lesson the hand teaches. Even the greatest guardians can fall, even the sturdiest fortresses can fracture, and one does not always return home whole. But as long as one man stands, as long as one wall remains firm, the fight is not over. Outside the Temple of Oaths, the Phalanx holds countless other secrets. There are areas that no one has stepped into for generations, corridors sealed by ancient malfunctions, or simply because the knowledge to open them was lost. There are chambers containing technology that even the best tech marines cannot understand. There are tunnels where the echo of fallen warriors can still be heard, or at least those who are alone at night believe they hear it. There is a librarium, a vast library where every campaign, every battle, every warrior who ever served in the chapter is recorded. Old parchment books are stacked high to the ceiling. Data slates contain the images of departed heroes. Tactical maps are drawn by Dorn's own hand, faded by time but carefully preserved. Each page is a piece of history, and together they form the narrative of a chapter that never stops fighting. But history comes at a cost. And for the Phalanx, the cost is the inevitable degradation. With every century that passed, more systems fell silent. Engines that once roared, now only gasped. Weapons that could once destroy a fleet, now could no longer fire. Not from lack of maintenance. The Imperial Fists cared for the Phalanx more than anything else, but because the knowledge to repair it was slowly vanishing. Each generation of tech marines learned less than the last. Secrets were passed from master to student, but with each passing, a little knowledge was lost. A ritual was forgotten. A technique was no longer understood. And with every lost piece of knowledge, a part of the Phalanx died. By the 41st millennium, the Phalanx was still a formidable fortress, but it only operated at a fraction of its original capacity. Large areas lay in the gloom, their systems long dead. Weapons that could once glass continents were now only useless heaps of metal. Energy shields that were once impregnable now had fissures that a clever and lucky enemy could exploit. And then came the trials that wounded it deeper than anything else. There was Bay-Lay-Kor, the first and most potent Daemon Prince, who led a direct assault on the Phalanx. The details of that battle are blurred by time and secrecy, but the scars remain. Areas where the metal is warped by warp power. Corridors where reality is still dangerously thin to traverse. And then came the gathering storm, the tempest gathering the darkest forces of the galaxy for the final assault of Abaddon the Despoiler upon the Cadian Gate, the gateway holding the Imperium from the warp storm of the Eye of Terror. When the news came, when the plea from Cadia echoed through the astropathic choir, the Imperial Fists did not hesitate. The Phalanx turned course, its engines roaring, and headed towards the storm with the resolve of those who never knew how to refuse. The Phalanx was there when it all began, fighting in the voids, approaching Cadia, where real space and the warp mingled like oil and water. It faced the Chaos Armada, thousands of battleships from the traitor legions combined into a colossal fleet never seen since the Horus heresy, ships covered in the symbols of the dark gods, vessels around which reality itself was distorted. Every engagement was a trial by fire. Every moment could be the last. Every salvo fired shook the entire frame of the giant vessel. The noise echoed through every corridor, causing dust to fall from the ceiling and electrical panels to spark. And slowly, through days of continuous, relentless fighting, though battling with unmatched courage, the Phalanx began to bleed, began to weaken from wounds that would not heal. Gun decks fell silent as their weapons were destroyed. The giant cannons transformed into heaps of molten scrap. Layers of armor meters thick were torn open like thin paper, exposing internal areas to the cold void outside. Thousands of crew and warriors died in an instant when sections of the ship were exposed to the vacuum, unable to exhale a final breath. But the Phalanx still fought, firing from the weapons that still lived, patching the breaches with emergency bulkheads, continuing to retaliate even as it sank into a sea of fire. For that was what it was born to do, nothing else. Because the Sons of Dawn did not know how to retreat, did not know how to surrender, did not know how to accept defeat, even when defeat stared them directly in the face, then the Blackstone Fortress, one of the ancient weapons from an age even the Imperium cannot understand, a weapon that Abaddon the Despoiler had captured at the cost of millions of lives, unleashed its power. A beam of energy, black as night, cold as death, shot across the void and struck Cadia directly. And Cadia, the fortress world that had stood firm through 13 Black Crusades, the world where people were born with a gun in their hand and died with it, began to fracture from within. Not conquered by invading armies, not defeated by a superior foe, but simply destroyed, erased from existence. The planet itself cracked open like a smashed egg, the outer shell breaking apart to reveal the molten core inside, and then the core too dissolved. The Phalanx, heavily damaged with melted armor plating in dozens of places, internal atmosphere leaking from hundreds of ruptures like blood flowing uncontrollably from an open wound, was forced to withdraw. The decision did not come from fear, for the Imperial Fists knew no fear, having been trained to face death from day one, but from cold calculation. On the command bridge, the officers in cracked armor looked at the screen with unblinking eyes and realized the simple, brutal, unassailable truth: remaining here, in this system collapsing every second, with Cadia disintegrating into fragments, would be a useless death. And the Sons of Dawn, taught by the most logical Primarch of all the Primarchs, the one who never let emotion cloud reason, knew that meaningless death was not a glorious sacrifice, merely a waste of precious resources in a war that never ended and perhaps never would end. As they retreated from the Cadian system, the engines roaring one last time to escape the gravitational pull of the planetary debris, the Phalanx was a shadow of its former self. Entire sections were exposed to the open void, metal twisted like broken bones. Other areas burned with unquenchable fires, the flames consuming oxygen and spreading through the corridors. Thousands were dead, their bodies drifting in depressurized compartments, and many more injured lay in makeshift medical stations. And worse than the physical injuries were the spiritual scars. Invisible but deeper than any cut, the memory of standing and watching a world be destroyed piece by piece, continent by continent. A world they could not save, could do nothing about, but watch in powerlessness. There was a moment, as the Phalanx drifted through the ferocious warp storms on its way towards Terra, the waves of psychic energy crashing against the hull, as the life support system weakened and the air grew thin, that people thought this colossal vessel would finally die, like a warrior collapsing from too many wounds. That 10,000 years of faithful service, 10,000 years of non-stop fighting, would end in silence and gloom amidst the warp waves, with no one to witness it. But it survived. Somehow, through the sheer will of the crew and warriors who refused to give up, it survived. Because the Phalanx, like the Sons of Dawn patching its breaches with temporary armor plates, did not know how to die until the mission was complete. And the mission, in this vast and brutal galaxy, was never, ever complete. Then came the era Indomitus, the age unbowed, the time of those who refused to accept defeat even when everything seemed hopeless. Rabuti Gilliman, the Primarch of the Ultramarines, the brother who fought alongside Dawn in the Great Crusade, returned from death after 10,000 years lying in stasis, resurrected to lead the Imperium in its darkest hour when the galaxy was engulfed in fire. And with his return, with the presence of a living Primarch once more, a wave of renewal swept through the Imperium like a spring wind after a long winter. Resources were mobilized in ways unimagined during millennia of stagnation. Technology was shared that had previously been held secret in the vaults of the Mechanicus. Knowledge was unlocked from forgotten archives, chambers no one had opened for centuries. The Magos of the Adeptus Mechanicus, the machine priests in red robes, came to the Phalanx anchored in Terra's orbit, carrying secrets preserved in the farthest forge worlds, secrets from the Dark Age that they had kept hidden through countless generations. Primaris technology, advances in biology and weaponry developed in secret by Archmagos Call over 10,000 years, brought new methods of maintenance to the ancient vessel. And slowly, with the patience of those who knew that haste in repairing a marvel like the Phalanx only leads to disastrous failure, the restoration work began inch by inch. Long years of non-stop work, day and night, if the void had day and night. Areas sealed since the time of Cadia were reopened. Half-meter-thick doors were cut open, their secrets finally understood through scanners and careful study. Systems, long silent, were relit, lights flickering then shining steadily, like a heart starting to beat after stopping for too long. Dead weaponry, cannons that could no longer fire, were resurrected, refurbished, ready once more to unleash their terrible power upon the foe. The wounds from Cadia, the horrific tears in the armor plating, were welded shut with new adamantium. New armor was forged in high-heat furnaces. New corridors were built where the old ones could not be salvaged. And when the work was completed after many years of tireless effort, when the last Magos left with a satisfied nod, the Phalanx emerged from the colossal repair docks, orbiting Terra like a phoenix from the ashes. Not entirely as it once was in its golden age. It could never fully restore what was lost in the Dark Age. But it was stronger than it had been at any time in the past 5,000 years, stronger even than before entering the war at Cadia. Its weaponry roared in the test shots shaking the surrounding space. Its shields shimmered with newly found energy, bright blue encompassing the entire hull. Its engines roared with a power long forgotten, a strength people thought lost forever. The Imperial Fists, who had waited in apprehension throughout the years of repair, looked at their reborn vessel from the observation windows and felt something they rarely permitted themselves to feel: hope. Not the vague hope of dreamers, not the weak hope fragile as a soap bubble, but hope forged from adamantium steel and unshakable resolve. Hope that no matter how dark the galaxy became, no matter how the Astronomicon flickered, no matter how numerous the enemies were from all sides, they still had the capacity to stand firm and fight, for the Phalanx had returned. And with it, the might of the Guardians, of the Watchmen, returned. Today, in the 42nd millennium, the Phalanx flies amidst the stars, as it did for 10,000 years before. It carries a warrior, Chapter 1000 Astartes in golden armor, along with tens of thousands of crew and engineers, through campaign after campaign, never lacking work. It is home, a warm place amidst the cold of space. It is a fortress, a mobile, unconquerable citadel. It is the symbol of constancy, all in one. Every Imperial Fist, from the newly inducted neophyte to the seasoned captain, knows that as long as the Phalanx exists in orbit anywhere, they will always have a place to return to. A place where their history is remembered on every wall. Their heroes are honored in every statue. And their Primarch, even if only through a hand preserved in crystal, still watches over them like a father watching his children. It is not perfect. Nothing in this brutal galaxy is perfect. There are still sealed areas, doors that cannot be opened, secrets lost forever in the gloom. There are still scars from battles, too terrible to fully heal. Small cracks on the armor plating that remind them of Cadia. There are still systems operating below optimum. Weaknesses that an intelligent and lucky enemy might exploit. But it stands firm, as it always stood firm for 10,000 years, as it will continue to stand firm until the last stars dim and the universe plunges into eternal night. For the Phalanx is not merely cold steel and stone, not merely metal and circuits running through it, not merely engines and weapons assembled by human hands. It will cast into physical form. It is determination transformed into a palpable structure. It is the refusal to accept defeat turned into a flying fortress, an eloquent declaration that the Imperium does not kneel. It is the vow to stand firm, etched into every slab of armor-thick adamantium. It is the soul of the Imperial Fists, as firm as they are firm against every challenge, as constant as they are constant in their duty, never retreating as they never withdraw from the battlefield even when besieged, manifested in a structure that the entire galaxy can see from afar. A declaration sent into the gloom that the Imperium still stands, still fights, still lives, and as long as the Phalanx flies amidst the stars, as long as its engines still roar through the warp, as long as its weaponry is still ready to fire, The Imperial Fists will never be alone in this vast and hostile galaxy. They will always have a home to return to after long campaigns, a place to heal wounds, both physical and spiritual, a place to remember the fallen and light candles for them, a place to swear vows to the yet unborn, the future generations who will continue the mission. And in a galaxy where everything is as fleeting as morning mist, as temporary as a candle before an ocean wind, and as fragile as thin glass that can shatter at any moment, one thing remains solid as rock, immutable as the laws of physics, reliable as dawn after a long night, is the most precious gift any warrior can receive in their brief life. And that gift is the Phalanx, forever flying amidst the stars like a beacon in the gloom, forever standing guard like a soldier who never sleeps, forever holding firm as the last wall between humanity and annihilation. Some legions fight for glory, for the sagas that will be sung across the centuries. Some legions fight for pure brutality, for the morbid joy in the shriek of the foe. And there is one legion that fights for duty, for no reason higher or lower than that, nothing more, nothing less. But to become an Imperial Fist is more than donning shining golden armor beneath the stars and hefting a heavy bolter. It is to embrace a harsh philosophy of pain as a silent teacher, of discipline as the air you breathe daily, and of perfection that is never achieved despite striving to exhaustion, but must always be pursued like an unquenchable flame. It is to accept that the road to excellence is paved with the sharp, shattered stones of failure, and every step upon that path will leave bloodstains, leaving the deep red footprints of those who do not turn back. And at the heart of this philosophy there is a tool that outsiders view with unconcealed horror, but which the sons of dawn regard as a sacred gift. The pain glove, though named a glove, is in reality a garment that envelops the entire body. Imagine a suit woven from electronic fibers as thin as hair, transparent as air, forming a complex network covering the entire body from head to toe. When activated, these fibers stimulate the nerve endings beneath the skin directly, generating sensations as if the entire body is burning in the fire of damnation, as if every cell is melting, as if the bones are fracturing piece by piece. But this is not real fire, though the brain screams that it is real. There are no measurable burns at the end. There is no quantifiable physical damage. There is only pain, pure as diamond, absolute as a law of physics, undeniable as death. And the most vicious thing about the pain glove is not the intensity of the agony, though it is enough to kill a regular mortal. It is that it keeps the wearer fully conscious, their awareness clear as day. There is no escape into unconsciousness as an open door to safety. There is no mercy of fainting that permits the mind to flee. There is only an awareness that is painful, a lucidity that is cruel, forced to confront every moment of the self-chosen torture, unforced by anyone else. For that is the crucial point that outsiders do not understand. The pain glove is not a punishment imposed by superiors seeking chastisement. It is cleansing chosen by the one who needs to be cleansed. When an Imperial Fist fails a mission, be it a small failure like a shot missing its target by a mere millimeter, or a great one like losing a defensive position that causes comrades to die, he may choose to enter the pain glove. When he feels self-doubt creeping into his mind like venomous snake, when the self-confidence that was once a rock now wavers like sand, when thoughts unworthy of a warrior of dawn creep into his consciousness, he may choose to enter the pain glove. When he knows he has allowed personal pride to override duty, allowed emotion to cloud clear judgment, he may choose to enter the pain glove. And in that agony, through the endlessly long hours, in the fire that is unreal yet burns the soul deeper than any real flame, the impurities are burned away like dross metal in a high furnace. Weak thoughts evaporate like water on red-hot metal. Doubts dissolve in the heat of the chosen torment. And when the pain glove is finally removed, the warrior steps out on trembling legs, drenched in sweat, but not weaker, but stronger, purer, like refined silver, more ready to face what lies ahead. This is the belief of Rogal Dorn, passed from Primarch down to his sons. Pain is not an enemy to be avoided. Pain is the harshest teacher. It teaches lessons that no other method can impart. It brings a clarity of thought that comfort can never bestow. And, most importantly, it reminds every warrior that they can endure far more than they think, that the limit they believed was final is only a temporary pause on the long road to true strength. Among all the companies of the Imperial Fists, there is one company that uses the pain glove more than all others. The second company, those bearing the name Scions of Redemption. They carry within them the memory of a terrible failure, the War of the Beast in the 32nd millennium, when the chapter was almost entirely annihilated, when there were barely enough men left to count on the fingers of one hand. And in their attempt to atone for that collective sin, they embrace the pain glove as others embrace a weapon. After every campaign concludes, the second company gathers in silence. They review every decision, every action. They seek out flaws like a jeweler seeks cracks in a diamond. And when a flaw is found, no matter how small, they enter the pain glove, not because they are forced, but because they know this is the only way to ensure that mistake is never repeated. That is why the second company is one of the most effective units, because they never repeat a mistake. Each instance of pain is a lesson etched not into memory, but into instinct. But the pain glove is only one aspect of the culture of endurance the Imperial Fists embrace. The entire process of becoming an Imperial Fist is a journey through deliberate suffering. Recruitment begins on the worlds from which the chapter is entitled to take tithes, Terra, where the chapter was once Praetorian. The moons of Jupiter, where adolescents grow up under high pressure, creating sturdy bodies and patient minds. Inwit, the ice world where dawn was found, where every child learned to survive in a harsh environment from the moment they could walk. Necromunda, the hive world, where only the strongest survive childhood, Pharos, and other worlds, each contributing their best youths with the hope that their sons would become golden-armored angels of death. These children, thousands every decade, are brought aboard the Phalanx. They enter the halls martialis, colossal training decks that can simulate every environment, from scorching deserts to frozen forests, from poisonous swamps to ruined cities. In these halls, they are assessed not just on physical strength. They must prove not only that they can fight, but that they can endure. Not just courage, but discipline. Not just intelligence, but the ability to learn from pain. Thousands are assessed. Only a handful succeed. Those who fail are not discarded. Imperial Fists do not waste resources. Some become the Auric Auxilia, mortal warriors fighting alongside the Imperial Fists. Some are sent back to serve as feudal overseers, supervising the recruitment of the next generation. And some, those who die in the process, even their bodies are not wasted. Their matter is compressed, transformed into rounds for the macro cannons. Even in death, they serve. But those who pass enter a unique path. The Imperial Fists have a promotion system designed to temper every facet of a warrior. First is the Scout Company, the 10th Company. Where neophytes learn to fight with stealth, they learn to observe how to move without leaving a trace, how to shoot with absolute accuracy. This is the stage that erases impetuousness. Then they transfer to Close Support, the 8th Company. This is where they learn to use heavy weapons at close quarters, learn to confront the enemy in sight, learn to control the instinct to retreat. This is the stage that purifies rashness. Only then do they transfer to fire support, the 9th Company, where they learn discipline and accuracy through the use of long-range weaponry. They learn that every round has value, every shot must be calculated. Only after passing through all 3 stages, having been tempered by scouting, close combat, and long-range fighting, are they considered for the reserve battle line companies. And only the very best are finally promoted to the battle companies. At this point, they are no longer impulsive youths, they are complete warriors. It is said that a warrior of the 2nd Company spends as much time in the pain glove as out of it, that their skin carries faint scars not from real fire, but from the times their heart nearly stopped due to the simulated intensity of agony that convinces the body it is dying, that they fight with the determination of those who have nothing left to lose because they have faced the worst pain imaginable and still stand, still breathe, still live. But the pain glove is only one part of the path to becoming an Imperial Fist. The journey begins long before that, from the moment a boy on Terra, Necromunda, Inwit, or one of countless other hive worlds realizes that his life is about to change forever, that he will never be the same again. The Imperial Fists do not distinguish by origin. Noble lineage, with long names and extensive assets, or an orphan in the underhive who knows not his parents, all are equal in the eyes of the unsmiling recruiters with their black robes and golden insignia. The only thing that matters is potential that cannot be measured by machines. The ability to endure pain, not only physically, but spiritually. The strength of will to rise after the 100th fall, and most importantly, the capacity to learn discipline. The capacity to transform themselves from a feral child into a reliable warrior. Every year, on the worlds where the Imperial Fists recruit by ancient treaty right, hundreds of boys aged 10 to 12 are assessed by men who do not smile. Their reflexes are tested through exercises requiring speed not typical of a child. Their musculature is measured by cold equipment to see if they are suitable for the implantation process of the new organs. Their capacity to endure pain is tested in ways that outsiders would deem cruelly illegal, but for the Imperial Fists, this is merely necessary honesty. If a boy cannot endure the agony of the selection process, with people caring for him afterwards, how can he endure the pain of becoming an Astartes when bones are broken to graft new ones, when a second heart is implanted in his chest? Those who pass the initial test, perhaps 1 in 50 chosen from thousands of applicants, are brought aboard the Phalanx in small spacecraft. And there, in the halls martialis, the vast training decks, as large as small cities with ceilings so high clouds can form, their true education begins not in words, but in action. 6 months, 180 standard Terra days, each 24 hours long without rest. That is the time every aspirant, one who yearns to be more than human, spends learning the things that will keep them alive. They learn Low Gothic if they do not already know it, must learn to pronounce every syllable correctly to be able to understand commands in the roar of battle. They learn the history of the chapter by listening to tales told by old chaplains, the great victories where the Imperial Fists held firm even when all seemed hopeless, the painful defeats where pride led to catastrophe, the departed heroes whose names are carved on the walls, and the lessons they left behind in their own blood. They learn about the burden they are about to carry, a burden not of metal but of responsibility, the burden of becoming one of the few chosen to protect all humankind from the darkness enveloping them from all sides. And they learn about pain as a separate subject. Not through the pain glove, not yet. They're still too young. Their bodies are still too weak, but they learn through training exercises that last until muscles tremble and refuse to obey. Through live combat sparring with each other, where broken bones and spilled blood are common occurrences. Through having to stand motionless for hours under the gaze of instructors, waiting for someone to falter first, they learn that pain is a part of life, not something to be feared, but something to be accepted and overcome. Of those who start, only half survive the first 6 months. Not all die. Some are simply not capable enough and are sent away with respect for having tried. But some die because the test is real and the danger is real, and the Imperial Fists do not pretend otherwise. Better to die in training with a chance of being cared for than to die in the first battle because of insufficient preparation. Those who survive enter the next phase. Implantation begins one at a time, separated by months to allow the body time to adapt. First is the secondary heart, a small organ smaller than the original heart, but sufficient to keep the blood flowing should the primary heart stop. The surgical process is unimaginably painful, the sensation like something alive digging inside the chest. Many die at this stage. Their bodies reject the new organ. Those who survive are stronger. Then comes the os modula, the organ that secretes hormones, causing bones to grow stronger, thicker, harder. For months afterwards, the aspirant feels as if their bones are burning from the inside, as if they are fracturing and rebuilding. They must consume colossal amounts of calcium. Many go mad from the pain and must be mercifully euthanized. Then the biscopia, the organ that causes muscle growth at an unnatural speed. Aspirants eat 3 times the amount of a normal person and are still constantly hungry. Their bodies transform before one's very eyes, from slender boys into massive blocks of muscle. Each stage is a trial by fire. And after each stage, the survivors are fewer. From 100 initial aspirants, perhaps only 20 remain by the final stage. And of those 20, perhaps only 15 become full scouts, official neophytes of the chapter. But those who do not become Astartes are not abandoned like useless refuse. The Imperial Fists remember the lesson from Dorn that no resource should be wasted, no potential discarded. Those who fail in the implantation phase but still live, those with the will but bodies that could not endure, are offered other roles. Some become the Auric Auxilia, mortal elite warriors fighting alongside the Imperial Fists in the most dangerous campaigns. They are equipped with better weaponry than any planetary defense force. They are trained by the best, and they fight with the courage of those who almost became angels of death, but fate did not permit it. They carry a grim pride, knowing they were not good enough to be Astartes, but still good enough to die for the Imperium. Others are sent back to their homeworlds to become feudal overseers, supervisors of the next generation of recruitment. They know what to look for because they were once candidates. They know the feeling of hope and failure, and they ensure that only the most worthy candidates are sent to the Phalanx, because they do not want anyone to endure the pain of failing without being worthy. And some, those who die during the implantation or training process, even their bodies are not wasted, following the practical tradition of the Imperial Fists. Their matter is processed, compressed in complex chemical procedures, transformed into rounds for the Phalanx's macro cannons. Even in death, they serve the chapter. Each round is a soul fired into space to protect the Imperium. It is said that these rounds shoot straighter, hit harder, because they carry the will of those who wanted to become Imperial Fists. But for the lucky or unlucky, depending on how one views the life of an Astartes, those who survive all 19 surgeries with every organ functioning perfectly and their body fully accepting the transformation, the journey has not ended, but truly just begun. They become scouts, the recon specialists of the 10th Company, equipped with lighter armor and sniper rifles instead of bulky bolters. And there, in the first real campaigns, under the close supervision of seasoned sergeants, they learn the lesson that no training room can teach through simulation: how to kill a conscious, breathing, living being, and more importantly, how not to be killed by one who wants to live just as much as you do. Many chapters rush to transfer scouts into battle companies as soon as they complete basic training, viewing the scout company as a brief apprenticeship phase. But not the Imperial Fists, who believe in a different philosophy passed down from Dorn. They believe in patience as the highest virtue, believing in marinating each warrior through different roles until perfect, or at least as close to perfection as can be achieved with inherently imperfect human material. From the 10th Company, with its recon role requiring stealth and patience, many neophytes, after years of fighting and surviving, move on to the 9th Company, the Devastator Company, the operators of heavy weapons from heavy bolters to las cannons. Here, they learn a new level of patience, learning to stand still as stone statues for hours on end, awaiting the perfect shot with absolute focus, undistracted by anything. Learning to curb the impetuousness of youth that wants to rush into battle with the discipline of organized fire, coordinated like an orchestra, with each weapon a musical instrument in the symphony of death. Every hour standing behind a heavy las cannon, waiting for the target to appear in the sight with the patience of a hunter, is an hour learning self-control, learning to see past the small ego that wants immediate action. Others may take a different path, entering the 8th Company, the Assault Marine Company. Those who fight in close combat with jump packs on their backs and chain swords in their hands. Here, the passion of youth is not extinguished, but channeled like water directed into a canal, controlled by iron discipline, forged into a sharp weapon, rather than letting it become a weakness that leads to needless death in impulsive anger. And only after being tempered in the reserve companies over decades, only after proving themselves in countless battles, from small skirmishes to campaigns lasting years, only after sergeants and captains have meticulously reviewed every aspect of their personality and ability, is a warrior considered to join the battle companies, the 5 direct fighting companies from the 1st to the 5th, the true backbone of the chapter where the most seasoned warriors are concentrated. It is a process that takes decades, from the moment the child enters the tunnel of terror to the moment the fully armored warrior stands in a battle company. But the result is warriors who not only know how to fight with perfect technique, but who know how to endure when everything goes wrong and the plan shatters. They know how to stand firm when others flee as fear consumes reason. They know how to face despair without wavering, because they have faced death many times and are still here to tell the tale. And throughout this process, through every stage from aspirant to neophyte to battle brother, they learn about traditions not written in books but passed down orally and through action. There is one tradition that the Imperial Fists and their successor chapters maintain for 10,000 years as a sacred treasure, the Feast of Blades, a name both poetic and bloody like its nature. Every 100 years, the most elite warriors from all of Dorn's successor chapters, from the Black Templars to the Crimson Fists to the Excoriators, gather on the Phalanx or a chosen world. Not to wage war against each other as enemies, but to contest as brothers who want to know who is stronger, not out of hatred, but out of respect. The duels of honor are held in large arenas with thousands of spectators, not fighting to the death like ancient gladiators, but until one side can no longer fight, until too much blood has been shed, or too many bones broken to stand firm. Blade against blade under the cold light, skill against skill honed over decades, will against will, hard as steel, the aggressive fighting style of the Black Templars against the perfect technique of the Crimson Fists, the impenetrable defense of the Imperial Fists against the astonishing speed of the excoriators. Each duel is a test of everything the chapter has taught, and each test is an opportunity to prove that Dorn's lineage remains strong after 10,000 years, still worthy of the legacy left behind. But the Feast of Blades is not only about competition to find who is best, not only about ego and pride, it is about brotherhood, a bond deeper than flesh and blood. In those days, when the chapters temporarily set aside their individual duties to focus on the festival, warriors from different chapters wearing different armor colors share stories at the table, exchange tactics learned from different battlefields, remember the fallen with tales that bring the dead back to life in memory. They remind each other that though they wear different colors, from the black of the Templars to the red of the Crimson Fists, though they follow different doctrines from asceticism to pragmatism, they are all the sons of Dorn. All carry the same gene seed, all share the same legacy. And when necessary, when the threat is great enough to demand unity, they will stand together like an unbreakable wall. And amidst the mundane days, between endless battles and unceasing duties, the Imperial Fists practice a stranger tradition that outsiders view with incomprehension. Scrimshaw, the ancient art of bone carving of the old Terran sailors, is inherited by the chapter and transformed into a sacred rite. In the rare moments of leisure between training and combat, an Imperial Fist will sit in a quiet corner of his private chamber, take the bone of a fallen brother entrusted to him by the chaplain after a solemn funeral rite, and slowly, meticulously, with incredible patience, carve onto it tiny inscriptions with a needle-sharp tool. The battle honors of the deceased are recorded battle by battle. The names of the enemies he slew are listed in full. The worlds he protected are carved with precise coordinates. Dates of birth and death. The last words, if any, were heard. Each carved line is a silent prayer. Each character is a remembrance that never forgets. No one knows when this tradition began in the long history of the chapter. Even the oldest chaplains who lived through 3 centuries only know that it existed before they were born, passed down from generation to generation like a flame passed hand to hand in the darkness. But its purpose is clear as dawn: to remember, to not forget. For in a brutal galaxy where millions die every day on countless battlefields, where heroes are forgotten before their blood can dry on the ground, where death is so common it loses meaning, the Imperial Fists refuse to let their brothers vanish into oblivion as if they never existed. These carved bones, artworks born from sorrow, are carried into battle as talismans, hung on armor by silver chains, affixed to weapons with sacred beeswax, or simply carried in a small leather pouch near the heart to feel the presence. And when a warrior, in the midst of a fierce battle, looks at the bone of his fallen brother, he remembers not with reason, but with flesh and blood. He remembers that he is not fighting alone in the gloom, that those who came before stood firm on this same wall and did not fall, and that when he falls in glory or simply in duty, someone will carve his name with the same meticulous care and remember him through the generations to come. That is how the Imperial Fists fight the greatest enemy that cannot be defeated by a bolter: oblivion. The second death when no one remembers you anymore. Not with grand statues of towering marble, not with heroic songs sung in vast halls, but with tiny lines carved on bone, executed in the absolute silence of the deep night, by large hands accustomed to wielding weapons, now holding a small carving tool, never trembling though the sorrow in the heart is heavy as lead. And in all these traditions, in all the harsh lessons taught through pain and blood, there is one truth that the Imperial Fists acknowledge so openly that it shocks other chapters, something that many other chapters would conceal beneath layers of self-deception and rationalization. Pride is their greatest and most dangerous weakness, the internal foe that cannot be killed by a bolter. They know this not through theory, but through spilled blood. They speak of it in every meeting. Chaplains preach of it in every sermon. Captains warn of it before every mission. And every warrior, in the quietest moments when alone with his conscience, must confront it within himself as one confronts a devil in the mirror. Pride has killed more sons of Dawn than all the bolters and chainswords of every enemy combined over 10,000 years. Pride in never retreating even an inch, even when strategy demands withdrawal, to live and fight another day. Pride in never accepting even the smallest failure, even when failure is inevitable and accepting it would save brothers. Pride in Dawn's legacy, left behind, to the extent that they refuse to change what he established 10,000 years ago, even when change would save their lives, because change is viewed as betrayal of the Primarch. But recognizing the disease is the first step on the long and painful road to a cure. And the Imperial Fists fight their pride just as they fight any other foe on the battlefield, with unshakable iron discipline, with the resolve to never give up, and with the acceptance that this is a war that can never be fully won due to the inherent imperfection of human nature, only to be fought every day, every hour, every second, when decisions are made. And there is one point of pride they permit themselves not to view as sin, one point they do not consider weakness, but simple truth. Their gene seed is one of the purest among all Astartes chapters. In an age when many chapters struggle with mutations that turn warriors into monsters and degradation that weakens the body, the Imperial Fists maintain a stable gene seed over 10,000 years like a biological miracle. There is only one irreparable deficiency: the Becher's gland, the small organ that produces toxic acid, allowing some Astartes to spit corrosive fluid as a biological weapon, has atrophied over the millennia, now completely non-functional in the Sons of Dawn, dying off as a vestigial organ no longer needed. But when questioned about this, the Imperial Fists feel no loss or inferiority. They do not require the biological tricks of the body. They do not require hidden weapons in the mouth. They have the bolter proven over 10,000 years. They have the chainsword that drinks the enemy's blood. They have a will that cannot be broken even when hammered by the hammer of the gods. And that is all they need to complete the mission. The purity of this gene seed is a source of deep, unspoken pride. It means they are still what Dawn created them to be 10,000 years ago. Not tainted by chaos, not changed by time. Through 10,000 years of unceasing war and death, through countless generations of warriors born and died, they remain the true sons of the Primarch. Nothing mixed, nothing corrupting the sacred bloodline. And that is what they will protect more than their own lives. For an Imperial Fist can accept death with composure, but never, under any circumstance, accept the contamination of the gene seed that is the final remaining legacy from Dawn. This is the philosophy forged through thousands of years. This is the culture passed down through countless generations. This is what transforms a trembling boy into a hardened warrior, a warrior into an Imperial Fist worthy of the name, and an Imperial Fist into a part of something more eternal than time. They stand on the walls not for glory that will fade, not for recognition from those who do not understand, but because it is the duty assigned 10,000 years ago and is still not complete. Because behind those walls, humanity lives for one more day, and as long as one son of Dawn still breathes, still stands firm on his feet, those walls will not collapse, even if the sky falls. Even if the cost is blood flowing like a river, even if the cost is unspeakable agony, even if the cost is the last life of the last man standing, for that is the path of the Imperial Fist laid out from day one. and they will walk upon that path with head held high, with back straight, until the last stars dim and the universe plunges into eternal gloom. There are things that Rogal Dorn could calculate with near absolute precision. The necessary thickness of a wall to withstand a salvo from a macro cannon, the optimum firing angle of a defensive position built on difficult terrain, the endurance of adamantium alloy when subjected to thermal stress and shock far beyond typical limits. Every variable could be measured, every outcome could be predicted, like perfectly interlocking cogs in a machine he had long understood. But there was one thing that even Dorn's utterly logical mind could not calculate, a concept both alien and unacceptable, like an unseen fissure running through a flawless foundation. That was betrayal. Not betrayal in outlying campaigns, but the kind of treachery that crept in amongst the Primarch brothers, who were meant to look in the same direction. In the final years of the Great Crusade, as victory followed victory and the light of humanity spread across every region of dark stars, there were small signs that very few noticed. Faint tensions, unspoken discords, sharp words exchanged between the Primarchs like invisible daggers. Not everyone sensed them, but they were present, like the changing winds before a great storm. Perturabo, the one called the Lord of Iron, Primarch of the Iron Warriors, was one of the focal points of those tensions. His temper grew increasingly weighted, as if every siege the Iron Warriors completed only caused the ground beneath his feet to sink a little deeper. Every fortress they tore down, every campaign they endured heavy casualties in, was met only with silence from Terra. There was no praise, no acknowledgement, only new orders sent, pressing them into other, more bloody sieges. Simultaneously, Rogal Dorn, whom Perturabo regarded as the only rival capable of matching him in the art of siege warfare, was the one who received all the trust that Perturabo always craved. When the Emperor needed someone to redesign the Imperial Palace, he summoned Dorn. When the most crucial strongholds needed reinforcement, Dorn was called upon. And the title Praetorian of Terra, the Guardian of Terra, was conferred upon Dorn, not Perturabo. There was a public argument between them, witnessed by many. Perturabo declared that he could breach the Imperial Palace within 1 month. Dorn responded in a measured voice, so placid that it felt like a silent insult, that he could hold it indefinitely. To Dorn, that was merely a tactical assessment based on data. But to Perturabo, every word was a knife twisting deeper into his already fractured pride. From that day, the relationship between the two legions was no longer just competition. It became a darker, deeper undercurrent, like the pressure of a tunnel about to collapse that only one of the two could hear. But Dorn did not perceive it. His mind was not crafted to understand such complex emotional injuries. He excelled in architecture, strategy, and logistics, anything with clear rules and measurable outcomes. But the mazes of politics, the motives hidden beneath courteous words, the emotions concealed under a veneer of duty, those were walls without blueprints, foes he could not see. There was another whom Dorn respected deeply, not out of affection but because of competence proven through action. That was Horus Lupercal, the one holding the title of War Master, the one chosen by the Emperor to lead the Great Crusade when he returned to Terra. That respect was genuine, and that very truth would open up tragedies Dorn could not predict. Even with his capacity to calculate everything else with near absolute precision, Dorn did not view Horus as a friend, because in Dorn's mind, the concept of friendship in the conventional sense barely existed. He did not seek emotional connection, did not build relationships based on intimacy. Dorn judged Horus by a different, clear, and pragmatic measure, that among the Primarchs, very few were genuinely competent enough to shoulder the role of leadership on a scale as vast as the Great Crusade. And Horus was one of them. Sanguinius, Primarch of the Blood Angels, was the rare one who established an emotional connection with Dorn. It was a deep, sustained, and genuine mutual respect between two very different warriors who were equally devoted to the Imperium. The Emperor always occupied a different position. To Dorn, he was the absolute standard for devotion, the supreme goal with which nothing could compare. And Horus, War Master of the Imperium, was a strategic assessment, a figure with capability, vision, capacity to organize and lead. For Dorn, that much was sufficient for cooperation. No need for affection. No need for human-style trust. Only competence. Therefore, when news arrived from Istvan III, when the first reports of the tragedy there began to spread, Dorn's initial reaction was not the personal pain of one betrayed, but the immediate denial on a logical level. The data did not fit any model he had ever known. Astartes killing Astartes. Thousands of the Imperium's warriors massacred by their own comrades. The Primarchs, who were created as the spiritual foundation of humanity's future, turning their backs on the mission they were born to execute, that was outside all calculation, impossible to exist in any of Dorn's equations. The Great Crusade was built on one core principle, that the Primarchs and their legions were absolutely loyal to the Emperor. Remove that foundation, and the entire architecture of the Imperium would collapse like a fortress with its base excavated. So Dorn concluded that the data must be wrong, a misunderstanding, a communication error, a plot created by Xenos to divide the Imperium. Any explanation was more logical than the thought that Horus, War Master of humanity, would turn against the Emperor. But then the proof arrived, not through rumors, but through flesh and blood, surviving warriors carrying the marks of the slaughter. Among them was Nathaniel Garrow, captain of the Death Guard, who saw the truth with his own eyes and carried it away from Istvan III. And when Dorn heard those words, when the irrefutable evidence was laid upon the table like a spear piercing through every last hope, the world of logic he always believed in fractured. It shattered fragilely like glass struck by a sledgehammer, revealing the cold void beneath. Dorn's mind, which always placed truth above emotion, assessed the data once more. And though the truth was as heavy as an entire world collapsing, there was only one conclusion that logic permitted. The betrayal was real. Horus had fallen, and the Imperium was plunging into a sea of fire. Others, those with warmer hearts and deeper emotional attachment to their brothers, might have denied it longer. They would try to find another reason, some explanation to avoid believing the worst. But Dorn was not like that. He looked straight at the terrifying truth unfolding before him and accepted it, because that was what had to be done. But acceptance and lack of pain are two completely different things. The agony Dorn felt did not stem from the betrayal of a friend, because he never had friendship with Horus in the human sense of closeness. The pain came from the fact that a certainty had been broken. If the War Master, chosen by the Emperor and most trusted of all Primarchs, could fall to chaos, then nothing in the galaxy held permanence anymore. No structure was sturdy enough, no belief strong enough to stand against this storm. Everything was merely sand drifting, and Dorn had spent his entire life building fortresses on that sand. In that moment, a part of Rogal Dorn's humanity died, and from the void just opened, something else was born. Harder, colder, and with no room for mercy. The first order he issued was brief and absolute, that every Imperial Fist warrior must return to the Sol system immediately. Across the galaxy, from thousands of burning front lines, the order was transmitted. Unfinished campaigns were abandoned. Forces conducting conquest missions were forced to withdraw. Garrison units were urgently recalled. Every battleship, every battle barge, every strike cruiser simultaneously turned their prows towards Terra like spears being gathered in preparation for the final battle. But the galaxy was too vast, and the Imperial Fists were spread across countless fronts. Some units could depart immediately. Others had to fight their way out of the engagements they were trapped in. And some, like the fleet of Alexis Pollux at Fall, were pinned down, forced to fight a fierce confrontation against the Iron Warriors before they could escape. Slowly, and with heavy losses, the Legion began to gather. But every day that passed was a day Dorn had to prepare alone. In those months, he began the work that would define the rest of his life. The work of transforming Terra into the ultimate fortress. This was no ordinary project. This was the largest construction undertaking humanity had ever attempted. An entire planet would be transformed into a stronghold, not a city, not a continent, but the entire world. The epicenter was the Imperial Palace, where the Emperor resided, where the Golden Throne laid the foundation for the Imperium's future. If the palace fell, the Imperium fell, and Dorn would never let that happen. He began with calculations. Thousands of pages of schematics, blueprints, and defensive data were analyzed down to the smallest detail. Every corner of the palace was scrutinized. Every access point was reinterpreted. Every potential weakness was identified and addressed. In Dorn's mind, a picture gradually formed, not the image of a building, but the blueprint of a complete defensive mechanism. Concentric circles of defensive lines were designed like the walls of a planet. Each ring was an independent fortress. If the outer ring collapsed, the inner ring would hold. If the inner ring was breached, the deeper ring would block the way. Layer by layer, tier by tier, like overlapping armor plates, built to attrit the enemy for every meter of ground they tried to take. But to build those walls, many other things had to be torn down. Dorn stood on a tall tower, looking down upon an area of Terra that was once an artistic center, where statues of pristine white marble caught the sunlight every morning, where monuments were gilded to commemorate heroes of the Unification Wars. That was the beauty of history, the memory of a time gone by, but in a siege, they were utterly useless. "Destroy it all," he commanded. The engineers around him looked at each other with horrified eyes. Those statues had existed for centuries, preserved through countless upheavals on Terra. They were part of the world's heritage. "I do not repeat the command," Dorn said, his voice so cold it seemed to echo from the empty void. "Monuments cannot shoot back. Marble cannot stop ordnance from orbital artillery. This area must become a kill zone, with no cover, no hiding spots. Destroy everything now." And they destroyed. For when Rogal Dorn gave an order, no one in his legion refused. Across Terra, similar scenes repeated. Many urban centers were razed. Millions of civilians were forced to evacuate, not with gentleness, not with comforting words, but with the ruthless efficiency of a strategist who understood that every day of delay could mean failure. Malcador, the Sigillite, the Emperor's right hand and one of the keenest minds of the Imperium, met with Dorn once. "Primarch," he said, his voice reserved. "I understand the importance of defense, but the cost to the civilians is too great. Millions are homeless. Some died during the relocation. Can we not balance military necessity and compassion?" Dorn turned to face Malcador. His amber eyes betrayed no emotion. "Compassion is a luxury of peacetime," he replied. "We are now at war. If Terra falls simply because I did not wish to destroy a few statues or relocate a few million people, then everyone on this planet will die. Not just a part, but all. I accept their hatred if that is the price for their survival." And when Malcador looked upon the Primarch's face, he realized that Rogal Dorn had changed. The builder the Imperium once knew, strict yet fair, cold yet righteous, had now transformed into something else. A weapon, a fortress cloaked in flesh and bone. The scale of the task at hand was so immense it would overwhelm anyone. Millions of laborers, from volunteers, conscripts, to those forced into service, worked 24 hours a day. Billions of tons of material were transported from Forge worlds across the entire Sol system. Supply lines stretched across many regions of the galaxy, all converging on Terra like blood vessels converging on the heart. Millions of tons of rock concrete were poured onto the ground. Adamantium was forged into armor plating as thick as entire buildings. Thousands of defensive gun emplacements were installed, from anti-aircraft guns to laser batteries capable of wiping out an entire invading army. Strong bunkers were dug deep into the planet's bedrock. The trench system was expanded to the extent that it could house an entire army. And Dorn supervised it all. Every detail, every decision. He slept, if it could be called sleep, only a few hours each week. A Primarch's body, along with an iron will, allowed him to endure a level of exhaustion that would kill any human. Week after week, he barely rested. When fatigue began to cloud his judgment, when doubts crept into his mind despite his attempts to suppress them, Dorn used the one tool he trusted, the pain glove. He would enter a private chamber on the Phalanx, lock the door behind him, and put on the torture device that his legion used for self-purification. For long, consecutive hours, a Primarch, one of the strongest entities in the galaxy, endured agony sufficient to crush the minds of lesser beings. Not for self-punishment. Dorn did not believe in self-pity or wallowing in self-recrimination. This was merely a form of maintenance, like sharpening a blade. The pain burned away all distraction, all doubt, all weakness. It brought clarity, and Dorn needed clarity more than anything else. When he emerged from the glove, his skin was paler, his eyes bloodshot from burst vessels, but his mind was sharper than ever, and he returned to work, always returned to work. Those around him recognized the change. Dorn before the heresy was strict, but still approachable. He listened to advice, weighed options, sometimes even revealed a hint of warmth to trusted officers. But Dorn, after the betrayal, became colder, more distant. He still listened, but increasingly he simply issued commands and expected absolute obedience. The emotional bond between Dorn and his warriors, his gene sons, which was already not strong, gradually faded. He no longer had time for mentorship, no more private teaching moments, only demanding the highest combat efficiency from them. The builder the Imperium once knew had become the destroyer of everything that could threaten Terra. In that process, a part of Dorn's humanity was burned away, leaving behind pure function, pure duty, a wall that did not know how to retreat. But he did not bear that burden alone. Sanguinius arrived, Primarch of the Blood Angels. If Dorn could call anyone a friend, it would be Sanguinius, for between them was a deep mutual respect between two very different warriors, equally devoted to the Imperium. Sanguinius' calm and noble presence became a counterbalance to Dorn's cold efficiency. Sanguinius did not judge Dorn's harshness. He understood why Dorn had to be that way. Where Dorn pressed everyone with reason and iron discipline, Sanguinius inspired with courage and grace. When they stood side by side, they were far more effective than when each fought alone. Jagatai Khan also arrived, Primarch of the White Scars, the swiftest legion, master of mobile warfare. The Khan brought what Dorn lacked: lightning-fast responses, flanking attacks, campaigns that appeared and vanished before the enemy could adapt. Where Dorn thought in terms of fixed defensive lines, Khan thought in terms of continuous movement. They did not always agree. The Khan was often irritated by Dorn's rigidity, and Dorn was wary of the Khan's unpredictability. But they respected each other, and most importantly, they still coordinated to protect the Throneworld. Dorn coordinated the overall strategy as Praetorian of Terra, but he was not autocratic. He consulted with his brother Primarchs, absorbed their expertise, and adjusted the plan according to their proposals. Politics might be a confusing maze, but in Dorn's eyes, military cooperation was a clear equation. Each Primarch was a crucial part that made the defensive lines stronger. Custodes warriors stood beside the Astartes. The Sisters of Silence prepared to confront demons in areas infected with chaos energy. The techno-priests of the Mechanicum oversaw weapons and machinery. Millions of the Imperium's military forces trained in trenches and fortifications. Every force that could be mobilized was gathered on Terra to protect the Throneworld. Throughout it all, Dorn continued to work, continued to calculate, continued to build and adjust in an obsessive and non-stop manner. Perfection was a goal he knew was unattainable, but Dorn still refused to accept anything less than the best that humanity could achieve. For Dorn carried a burden that no one else could share. The Emperor placed his absolute, complete trust in him, entrusting Dorn with the most crucial mission in the entire history of the Imperium, holding Terra. The survival of the entire human race rested entirely on Dorn's capability, on whether he could execute that duty. If Dorn failed, the Emperor would fall, the throne would be destroyed, the Imperium would collapse, chaos would swallow the galaxy. All the sacrifices of the Great Crusade, centuries of war, billions of lost lives, would become meaningless. Pressure like that could crush most living beings. But Dorn was not them. He accepted that pressure and transformed it into motivation. Every moment of doubt, every flicker of fear, every whisper in his mind that the task might be impossible, all were channeled by Dorn into the pain glove, to be incinerated and transformed into cold, unwavering will, and then slowly, painfully, seemingly impossibly, Terra changed. The planet that was once beautiful became scarred, rugged, cruel, but unbreakable. Every approach was controlled, every weakness was reinforced. Every situation had a contingency plan. The inner wall, commanded by the Emperor himself and protected by the Custodes and Sisters of Silence, stood as the final fortress. If the outer wall fell, this area had to hold. At least, that was the plan. The outer wall, commanded by Dorn and protected by the Imperial Fists and allied forces, stretched across many continents, hundreds of kilometers of continuous fortifications, overlapping layers of defense, fields of fire so tightly interwoven that no enemy could advance without paying a heavy price. The orbital defense system was organized into multiple layers. Fleets were stationed at key points. Defensive stations were crammed with heavy weaponry. Bases on the moons were transformed into fortresses. Even the asteroids were armed. The entire Sol system became a fortress the galaxy had never witnessed. Not for beauty, but for the necessity of survival. And when the work was finally complete, or at least as complete as it could be before the attack struck, Dorn stood on the highest tower of the Imperial Palace. He looked down upon the scarred land below and allowed himself a moment of acknowledgement. Not pride. Dorn did not believe in pride, only the acknowledgement that the work was done, well done, perfected to the maximum extent humanly achievable. Now, there was only the waiting. Waiting for the storm to strike, waiting for Horus to appear, waiting to see if every calculation was correct, every sacrifice worthwhile, every wall strong enough. A heavy sense of anticipation covered Terra like a pall. Everyone knew the attack would come. No one knew when, no one knew how, but it was as certain as death that it would arrive. Hope mixed with fear in a strange alchemy. Hope that the defenses would hold. Fear that they wouldn't be enough. Hope that reinforcements, the Ultramarines, the Dark Angels, the Space Wolves would arrive in time. Fear that they wouldn't. And Dorn stood watch. Sleepless, tireless, unwavering. For that was duty. And duty was the only thing left that made sense in a galaxy gone mad. Days turned to weeks. Weeks to months. Building never stopped. Drilling never ceased. Preparation was endless. Then one day, sensors screamed. Warp signatures were detected at the edge of the Sol system. Not one or two, hundreds, thousands. Horus had come. The traitor fleet emerged from the Immaterium like a plague of locusts. So many ships that starlight was dimmed. So much hatred concentrated in one armada that reality itself seemed to recoil. And on Terra, in the strategium of the Imperial Palace, Rogal Dorn looked at the tactical displays with an expressionless face. Numbers scrolled. Enemy fleet composition was analyzed. Attack vectors were calculated. Everything he built was about to be tested. Everything he sacrificed was about to have meaning or be proven worthless. All forces to battle stations, he commanded. His voice was steady as stone. Enemy engaged at maximum range. No retreat, no surrender. Hold every position to the last breath. Around him, officers hurried to relay orders. Alarms blared across the planet. Millions rushed to their posts. Guns elevated. Shields activated. The fortress was prepared. And Rogal Dorn, Praetorian of Terra, architect of the greatest defense in human history, watched the enemy approach and felt no fear, no doubt, only cold certainty. The storm had arrived. Now, the walls would hold, or the galaxy would burn.